Hello, everyone. Welcome to our global learning event organized by Communication Leadership Master's Program at the University of Washington. I'm Ekin Yashin, the director of the program, and today I'm joined by and co-hosting the program with Alex Stonehill, the associate director of the program. We're so excited today, and I just want to note that this event is being produced by one of our master's classes, Building Community Through Livestream too. So our students are in the studio putting this event together. Before I tell you a little bit about today's topic, I just want to invite you all to tell us a little bit about yourselves. This is an innovative, interactive, live streamed event. So we'll use platforms and apps like Slido to gather also your sentiments throughout the event. So please tell us using Slido, and I will just share the information just in a minute, who you are, where you're from, and also a little bit about what you do as well. There is a QR code that you can use to connect to Slido, and again, you'll use that platform to interact with us, as well as also sharing your questions with us as well, so throughout the live stream. But today we have a very special event. Again, this is an event we organize each year. It's a free event for professionals, particularly marketing and communication professionals, and our community as well. And each year we use this as an opportunity to explore a topic that we're thinking about. And what's on our mind today is thinking about social media. Of course, our program itself has been thinking about social media, how we interact with it, how we use it as communication and marketing professionals, and ethics and privacy concerns around it for now over 2 decades. But we find ourselves in a peculiar place where we are a part of a very complex global order. These tools are ever changing, and there are questions about how to interact and how to be in these platforms in this complicated space. So to make sense of it all, we organized today and we invited speakers who'll help us figure it out. And we have a really exciting lineup today that will help us kind of make sense of where we're at with social media across different spectrums. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to do today. So we have schedule planned, and again, you're going to be with us for about 4 hours, and again, a very filled program. So we're going to start off in our first session is about polarization and thinking about social media. And we're going to share some perspectives with you. We have a special guest, Professor Christopher Bale, who will share a bit of insights from his book that we loved, Breaking the Social Media Prism. We'll have some Q&A section with our esteemed guest, and then we'll move on to second session, which is going to explore the relationship of social media and how, as communication and marketing professionals, we can engage with it today, types of questions emerging today from use of AI to making impact using these platforms to thinking about engaging different generations. We have 3 speakers who are all instructors, faculty in our communication leadership program. They're fantastic, and they're also leaders in the field. Kelly Myers, Hannah Teresa Park, and Rob Solkowitz will join us. They'll each give presentations. We'll learn from them. We'll have some interactive activities with you. And at the very end for session 2, we'll have a Q&A. And then at the end of the session, we'll have an opportunity for you to use, again, a new platform to engage with one another for networking purposes as well, and that's gather.town. So that's just a quick overview of what's happening today. And I just want to encourage you all to take notes today, because all participants will get to receive an online recognition of their learning. We're offering a digital badge in recognition of your learning today, and that's what you'll receive upon completing a reflection exercise inspired by today's learning, again, through our speakers. So let's kick it off. I want to invite Alex, and I want to ask him to introduce our esteemed first speaker. So Alex, hello, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, Akin. Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you for another year of CommLead Connects. This is always one of the highlights of my year, getting to do this, and one of the best parts of the year in our professional master's program. So yeah, we're super excited about our first speaker, who is Professor Christopher Bale. He's a professor of sociology, political science, and public policy at Duke University, where he founded the Polarization Lab, where he and others study how artificial intelligence shapes human behavior in a range of different settings, as well as in social media platforms in particular. His widely acclaimed 2021 book, which I have right here, called Breaking the Social Media Prism, How to Make Our Platforms Less Polarizing, was featured in the New York Times, the New Yorker, and was described as masterful by Science Magazine. It also inspired Twitter to implement a major change in its policies to counter misinformation and polarization. So today, Professor Bale is going to talk about ways that we can rethink the common paradigms around polarization on social media. Before I hand it over to Professor Bale, I just want to remind our audience that part of what today is all about is your participation and interaction. So there was going to be an opportunity for Akin and I to ask some questions of yours to Professor Bale at the end. So please share those on Slido if you follow the link that we had up on the QR code, and we'll put that back up on the screen in a second. You can go to that Q&A tab there and then just share any questions that come up for you while Professor Bale is talking. And you can upvote others' questions there as well. And then we'll try to filter some of those into the Q&A at the end of Professor Bale's talk. Also, you can feel free to share your comments and reactions during the talk on YouTube. There's a comment section there on the side of the screen, and we will highlight some of those comments in the stream as well. So without further ado, I think we have Professor Bale ready to take over, and I'll hand it off to you. Thank you so much for being here with us, Professor Bale. We're looking forward to hearing from you today.
Yes, very inspiring book. So we look forward for our community to learn from you today.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Akin and Alex. It's a pleasure to be here and meet you all and tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in the Duke Polarization Lab for the past 5 years or so. Could I go ahead and share my slides here? There we go. Okay, cool. Perfect. Thank you. So first things first, this is a bit of an interactive presentation. If you'd like to follow along with some of the apps and other interactive data visualizations in this presentation, you can go ahead and screenshot this bit.ly link, or maybe someone would be so kind to share it in the chat or in the YouTube comments. So I'm going to talk to you today about the book that was just mentioned, Breaking the Social Media Prism. And, you know, the subject is something I think many of us can see all around us, which is political polarization in the United States. And, you know, we hear a lot about political polarization. Of course, it's a complex, multi-dimensional concept. And there's many different kinds of polarization that social scientists like me study. But one of the ones that people are most concerned about is what we call affective polarization. So our tendency to dislike the other party, sort of no matter what they say. If we look at other kinds of polarization, like how much we disagree about issues like gun control, climate change, even affirmative action, we're actually much less polarized than most people realize. We'll come back to that at the end of the talk today. But I wanted to mention the affective polarization because that's something that really sets off alarm bells when we look at historical data. So between 1960 and 2020, we went from not caring very much if our neighbors were from the political party or if our children were to marry someone from the opposing political party to becoming very, very concerned about those types of things. And I think you can see it on TV, you can see it certainly you can see it on social media. So, one of our apps is down. Sorry about that, folks. I was trying to show you a link to a tool on polarizationlab.com. Maybe someone could drop the link in the chat here. That just shows something that I think many of us already know, that there are social media echo chambers. And you know, the idea here, as we're looking at some of my colleagues in the Duke Polarization Lab here, is that you know, social media has allowed us or even encouraged us to surround ourselves with like-minded individuals. And that in doing that, it's created a kind of myopia where most of us are only able to see one side of the story. Maybe we're not even aware that there's two sides to every story. And in effect, this is what explains the sudden, unexpected events that so many people were shocked by in the last 5 years. Maybe if you're a Democrat, it was the election of Donald Trump, or, in Britain, the success of the Brexit referendum. There's just a lot of different cases where social media sort of shocked us. And the most compelling explanation for a lot of us is that we're simply stuck in an echo chamber, or if you like, a filter bubble. Okay, so I thought this was the answer, and my colleagues in the polarization lab thought this was the answer, and many other people, influential people in Silicon Valley, also thought this was the problem, like Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, former CEO of Twitter, and others. And so way back in 2017, when we started our lab, a lot of people were asking, why don't we just break our echo chambers? Why don't we just stop trapping people among like-minded people and begin exposing them to people outside their bubble? If we did this, maybe people could begin to drop their partisan attachments and begin to maybe empathize with each other as human beings. Now, there's a huge amount of research that would support the idea that connecting with people who are different than you can reduce prejudice. We know that prejudice tends to thrive in the absence of intergroup interaction, where maybe these stereotypes can't get challenged by personal experiences. And so we thought, let's design some research to try to figure out if taking people outside their echo chamber might make them more moderate. So what we did is in October 2017, we recruited about 1,600 Republicans and Democrats who use Twitter. And we asked them a bunch of questions about what they think about politics, how often they use social media. All these people, by the way, were over 18 and were US citizens and identified with either the Republican or the Democratic Party. So this is not the whole population of the United States. It's a relatively small segment of the population that uses Twitter and describes themselves as belonging to either the Democratic or the Republican Party. 1 week after we sent them this survey, an online survey, we sent them a follow-up that asked them, hey, would you be willing to follow an automated Twitter account that will tweet 24 times a day? We didn't tell them what the account would tweet about. We only told them that if they wanted to earn these additional financial incentives we were offering, about $30, they would have to follow the account for a whole month. Now, gradually, those who accepted our invitation began to see more and more tweets from opposing political party members, people like elected officials, journalists, media pundits, advocacy organizations, a large group of what you might call opinion leaders from the other political parties. So if you are a Republican in our study, you might start to see some tweets from Hillary Clinton, who was, of course, the presidential candidate back then, Planned Parenthood, and other groups like that. And conversely, if you were on the Democrat side, you might see Republican elected officials, but also people like David Brooks, the centrist right-wing columnist for the New York Times, or Fox News. And so for 1 month, approximately half the people in our study followed the other side. And then at the end of this month, we resurveyed them to try to figure out whether taking them outside their echo chamber did make them more moderate. Okay. So there's a big problem when you do research on a social media platform, which is how on earth do you know if people are paying attention to what you're trying to show them? And you might say, okay, well, if I were in this experiment and I gradually started to see lots of messages that maybe I don't agree with and maybe I don't like, probably the first thing I would do is unfollow your bot, right? And so, of course, we had ways of monitoring whether people unfollowed the bot, and people knew that we could detect whether they weren't following the bot. But then you might say, okay, well, maybe I'll just stop paying attention to the tweets. Well, we wanted to know whether people were actually looking at the tweets. And so each week during the study, our bot retweeted one of these three truly adorable creatures. And at the end of that week, we asked people, can you identify which cute animal picture we've been tweeting all week? And this allowed us to measure not only whether people are paying attention, but also sort of how closely they're paying attention week to week. And allows us to pretty precisely estimate, we think, what happens when people step outside their echo chamber. So, about to show you the headline finding of about 2.5 years of planning and research, and really large group of Americans, again following lots of different high-profile people from the other side. So these are politicians, pundits, advocacy groups, a large sample of people from the other side that we identified using network sampling techniques that I can talk a lot more about in the Q&A if anybody's interested. And remember that we were hoping, and many tech luminaries, and I would also add, policymakers, even still today, hope that breaking people out of their echo chambers will make them more moderate. Unfortunately, we found more or less the opposite. So here you can see we have Democrats on the left here and Republicans on the right here. And these different levels here on the left here describe how closely they paid attention to the treatment we were trying to give them, which was these bots tweeting things from the opposing political party. And what you see is the more people paid attention, the more they complied with the treatment we were trying to get them, the more they doubled down in their pre-existing views. So this is perhaps most evident for Republicans here. Republicans who followed our Democratic Twitter bot for 1 month did not become more liberal. On average, they became considerably more conservative. And the more they paid attention to the bot, the more conservative they became. For Democrats, it's sort of the same story, except the effect is much smaller and it's not statistically significant. If we had a much larger study, my guess is it would have been statistically significant. So we can't say that Democrats also sort of backfired when they saw these tweets from Republicans. But in general, we can say that nobody seemed to become more moderate as we had hoped. Now, once again, this is an interactive presentation. If you want to follow along, you can click here to read the study that we published that describes this quantitative field experiment. So the problem I'll bet you're asking, and we were certainly asking, is why? Why would taking people outside their echo chamber, make them more polarized? First of all, this is a weird thing to do, right? Most people don't follow politics at all. Most people use social media to connect with celebrities, to follow sports, to talk about video games. But my guess is this is a relatively learned group of people who do follow politics. And I just ask you to start thinking about like the last time you willfully exposed yourself to the other side, if you've ever even done this. And again, most people haven't even done that. Just try to think about that experience for a minute. And as you're doing that, I'll tell you the story of some people that we met in the course of doing an additional follow-up study for this research. And what we did basically was, so first we had this large experiment, about 1,500 people, and experiments are great. And at the time we were throwing every single tool from data science and machine learning and our AI that we could at the data to try to understand why this happened. But despite having collected millions of tweets, daily slices of people's social networks, having pretty impressive detailed accounts of what they like, what they comment upon, all sorts of surveys about their political attitudes before and after and how they use social media, we still couldn't make sense of it. Nothing seemed to answer the question of why people were backfiring. So we decided to go back into the field, but this time, instead of using a large survey experiment where people are just completing online surveys, we would go and talk to people. So before people were in either our treatment control condition, we went and did about an hour to 2 hour long interview with them by phone to really learn just more about them. Who are they? How do they use social media? We didn't talk about politics right away, but we gradually began to ask them a series of questions designed to measure how they were experiencing this sort of strange experience, stepping outside your echo chamber. And so I'll try to give you a sense of how most people reacted by telling you the story of a woman that I call Patty. That's a pseudonym to protect her identity. But Patty lives in a rural area of the country. She's in her early 60s, and she's pretty much above all using social media when we first met her to follow her favorite like crime drama shows. She likes some brands that she follows on social media, relatively unremarkable social media account. But that's like most people, right? Most people aren't sort of saying anything profound on social media. They're just sort of using it for fun. And so there was no evidence in her social media feed of whether she was a Republican or a Democrat. And we didn't ask her right away. We wanted to sort of get to know her first. But when we began to ask Patty questions about like which, television shows she watched or which news programs she watched, she said, well, I don't really love, Tucker Carlson. Like he just seems sort of mean. And so we're starting to think, okay, well, she's probably sort of a Democrat then. But then she says, but I really don't like Don Lemon, the former CNN anchor, either. And so we're saying, okay, this is sort of complicated. She seems to be sort of in the middle. Eventually, after talking to her for 20, 30 minutes, she says, yeah, in the last election, I voted for the Democrats. Now, if you follow the national media around the rise of the sort of Trump movement, you would hear a lot about this type of person, sort of disaffected from both parties, feels like the country has left them behind. And Patty not only didn't care for the media, but she had many opinions that were sort of not in line with a typical Democratic platform. For example, she worried that immigrants threatened the sort of cultural values of our country. She worried that they were getting benefits in an undeserving manner. All sorts of like our opinions, they're sort of more in line with what the Republicans were talking about at the time. So when we went to run this experiment, I said, okay, we found the one person who, when we take her out of her somewhat liberal echo chamber, she's going to go hard for Trump. She's going to buck the trend, and we're going to see someone actually move to the other side. But we were wrong again. In case you haven't learned it yet, I'm wrong a lot, and believe very strongly in the virtue of being wrong and learning from it. And what we learned from Patty is that stepping outside her echo chamber didn't really make her sort of more aware of alternative arguments or other ways of seeing the world. She sort of realized there was a war going on, and she had to pick a side. So in some ways, it sort of activated her partisan identity. She felt attacked, and then she had to learn how to respond to the people attacking her. This is a phenomenon that a lot of social scientists call social learning. If you compare human beings to other, species, one thing that's really strange about us is we care a lot about what other people think about us. From a young age, we're sort of tuned to look for hints in our environment about what makes other people like us or dislike us. And we all sort of, to some degree, crave to fit in, to have social status, to be accepted by and liked by others. And so the really interesting thing we learned from tracking people like Patty is that social media has created a sort of perverse kind of social learning. We want to use social media as a kind of mirror that we hold up to society and say, here's where I fit in. But instead, what we see is a very distorted prism of society that gets filtered back through social media. And to get into some of the more details, you'll see that, and you probably won't be surprised to learn, that social media is hardly a representative sample of Americans or really any country. And the problem is we all forget that. And when we forget that, we get trapped into some pathological tendencies that encourage us to learn more extreme sort of mannerisms and perform more uncivilly, I would argue, and really, in general, have a corrosive effect on our ability to find common ground. Now, the good news is we're gonna hopefully by the end of this talk propose some ways to get out of this situation. But before we go there, I just want to go over some data that we discovered in the talk here. And there's no audio in this, by the way, for the AV folks. If we look at the general population of Twitter users, we find that people who talk about politics make up just 6% of all users, but generate about 20% of all tweets and 73% of all tweets mentioning politics. So who is this small group of people that generates all the content about politics? Turns out they are among the most extreme people in the country. So 55% of the small group of people making all the noise consider themselves very liberal or very conservative, but they only constitute about 6% of the US population. And so the problem is when we wander outside of our echo chamber, we're not sort of abutting with, the full distribution of people from the other side, right? We're seeing this tiny, angry, loud minority. And importantly, most importantly, confusing them as representative of the other side, a phenomenon we often call false polarization in the scientific literature. Okay, so if you have time to check out my book, or if you want to read more on our website, we have a lot of other resources that go deeper into explaining the science of how we think this happens. Many more stories of people who will illustrate some of these dynamics. For example, you can read about a surprise troll who, despite being a very moderate and civil person in person, turns into the biggest troll on the internet every night. We think because of some of the status seeking dynamics that I was describing earlier. Or you can read about the missing moderates, not only why social media has created an environment where extremists can reward each other and sort of goad each other, but also why moderates completely disengage. So you'll hear about people who stopped using social media because they thought there was no point, right? And the problem is when those types of people stop using social media, it allows this social media prism to become even stronger. The extremists occupy more and more real estate, and extremists, of course, attack moderates routinely, especially people in their own party, creating a kind of spiral of silence effect. Okay, so in the time remaining, and I want to hear from you all about what you think and whether any of this jives with your experiences, I want to talk to you about what we might do. So I do think social media companies can and should do a lot, and I'll talk about them in just a minute here. But before we get there, I want to talk about us. Because one thing that we've learned in this research is that much as it would be great if people like Mark Zuckerberg had a magical dial deep inside Meta and could turn down the incivility, that would be great. If that existed, I'd be all for him turning that down. The problem is, I don't think that dial exists. The research increasingly shows that one of the key problems is not just social media is sort of more of a lens that is reflecting society back to us. In fact, a New York Times reporter who wrote about my book said, maybe we should all know less about each other. So in other words, maybe social media has created too much connection and allowed us to realize that we are a much more angry, upset country than we thought we were. So that may be true, and the optimist in me hopes it's wrong, because I think a lot of great stuff can come out of social media, and I can talk in the Q&A about how we think AI and other tools can help us facilitate new and more productive conversations on social media. I do think one of the first steps is for all of us to become more introspective social media users. If you are old enough, you might remember people used to say, well, if you don't like something, vote with your wallet, right? Like, don't buy it. And I think if we translate that kind of logic into social media, we can think that, we're voting with our like buttons, we're voting with our eyeballs. And so anytime we engage with something, we're in effect saying, give me more of this, please. And so one way we can train ourselves to avoid doing that is to start to recognize extremists as such, try to avoid them and not engage them and feed the fire. And so on polarizationlab.com, we created a number of free tools that we call middleware. These are apps and bots, some of which work, which you can use in tandem with social media sites. Now, unfortunately, when Elon Musk took over Twitter, he shut down the data pipelines that ran many of our tools. So as you can see on this slide here, many of them are no longer working, thanks to our friend Elon. But to the general argument that we think everyone needs to hear is that we can and should become more reflective social media users, and our decisions about who or what to engage with have huge consequences. So, for example, we maintain a bipartisanship leaderboard on polarizationlab.com that allows you to identify those people whose content is getting likes from people on both sides, rather than just simply seeing the stuff that everybody is engaging with, which is what most social media algorithms do. These types of tools can allow you to reconfigure your social media experience. And if you use tools like Blue Sky or Mastodon, the open source nature of these environments will soon hopefully allow us to customize these even further. So there's stuff that all of us can do, but what can platforms do? Well, one really big problem with studying this topic is, much as I might like to waltz into Meta or Google or wherever and say, hey, here's this new algorithm, go try it, right? That's all risk and little reward for them. So you have to, step back, I think, and ask the question, if we could redesign social media from scratch, where would we begin? Like, could we sort of peel back the layers of the onion and identify those elements that are divisive and identify those elements that are productive, and trying to, come up with a secret sauce? And I think, again, like, if there's one thing that's exciting about the current moment in social media, is that there's so much potential for change. I think, like, nobody's particularly happy with social media right now, and yet we're in the early days, right? We still have time to reset and rethink about how the platforms work. We can't be naive. There's plenty of, the graveyard of optimistic social media ventures is well populated, but we can think about the Venn diagram that links interesting and important and useful social media experiences with those that are good for society. And so in the Duke Polarization Lab, we created something called the Social Media Accelerator, which is a environment where researchers can create different social media architecture and then recruit people to use them, and then study which aspects are polarizing and which aren't. So I'll give you one example from one of our last studies, and then I'll wrap up and look forward to hearing what you all think. So this one's a little counterintuitive. We created a platform called Discuss It. We wanted a somewhat lame name because we didn't want to convey that the point of the app was going to be that you were going to talk to someone from the other political party. We were worried that if we called it like Break Your Echo Chamber or something like that, lots of people would not want to do it, and those that would be left would be unusual. But Discuss It was a platform where we asked people to talk about either immigration or gun control anonymously with a member of the other party. Why did we want to study anonymity? Well, anonymity gets a really bad rap. And in many parts of the internet, I think it is a strong net negative. People say things to each other that they would never say in person. There's no consequences for being mean to someone, really, most of the time. And so, you might say, well, anonymity shouldn't be allowed on social media. A lot of people are saying that, actually. Now, there's another side of the coin, though, which is that anonymity allows us to put our ideas before our identities. We're able to calmly and deliberately consider each other's messages without, having that sort of short, half-baked reaction to the person based on maybe their political orientation or what they look like or what they sound like. And anonymous conversation has also empowered, people in authoritarian regimes. It's empowered members of stigmatized or minority groups in the US and elsewhere, people who suffer from rare medical conditions, right? There could be some good of anonymity too, but this is the perfect type of example of a question where, we just sort of naively pressed on, saying, okay, well, anonymity is probably bad, without thinking it through too much. So we ran a large experiment where we had, half of the people talk anonymously with a member from the other party, a person from the other political party, for about 15 minutes. They just had a conversation. These were far-ranging, kind of went all over the place, and unfolded across the entire United States for about 3 or 4 weeks. And eventually, what we discovered after tracking the polarization sort of attitudes before and after the experiment is that, somewhat surprisingly, anonymous conversations led people to have more productive conversations about politics, particularly Republicans who talk to Democrats. Everybody always talks to someone from the other party, but Republicans who talk to Democrats depolarized 4 to 5 times more than Democrats. So the effect of this intervention seems to be particularly strong among Republicans, suggesting perhaps that the strong party orthodoxy against any kind of compromise with the Democrats means that we need to create these sort of new and innovative environments where cross-party conversations can happen. Now, I would never say, Facebook should become anonymous tomorrow, or Twitter should be fully anonymous. I think that would probably be a disaster. You have to have carefully cultivated environments. But we're learning more about how to combine the different features of social media in different places and in different spaces to create these types of effects. Again, if you want to learn more about all this, I invite you to check out our website, our book, or if you want to read more about the work of the Polarization Lab or some of the other more recent work I've been doing on leveraging AI for democratic discourse, I invite you to check out my website, chrisvale.com. So thank you all. Look forward to hearing what you think.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you so much for this very thoughtful presentation. Again, we were very excited to share this with our community, having read the book, and what an interesting finding. I really appreciate your approach of social media as social learning, because the book itself also is very much about those steps of discovery and different approaches to your experiments as well. So we have tons of questions, and we have limited time. So I'm going to start with one from one of our master students, Chantao. And he wanted to ask you a question about kind of global contexts. And I know we talked a lot about the US, but your thoughts on it. So he says, thank you so much. Even though people are educated and informed differently, polarization on social networks occurs in communities from all different countries and cultural backgrounds. Taking the Chinese community as an example, people living in China are not allowed to make particularly negative comments about politics and the government. So politically, people's public speeches are basically convergent, but people still argue about many issues, such as international relations, women's issues, so on and so forth. What do you think about the fact that in some societies where there's not much room for political discussion, there are still the kind of arguments and attacks spreading on the internet about many other topics?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Chentao is right that there's, quite a bit of polarization internationally. Especially in Western Europe. Though, interestingly, the data is not quite clear that polarization is getting worse everywhere. In fact, polarization is getting better in some countries. And so, it's really tempting to say, well, can we look at where social media went when, and then conclude whether it had a positive or a negative effect? And that's really hard to do. We can't do the kind of controlled experiments that I was talking about earlier. But there's a lot of studies of this now. We have about 500 studies looking at the effect of digital democracy, or effect of digital forces like social media on democratic outcomes, like polarization or trust in government and things like that. And one of the striking findings of a paper that recently appeared in the journal Nature Human Behavior by a German scholar named Philipp Lorenz-Spreen, who looked at these 500 studies and categorized whether they had a positive or a negative effect, then he found that social media was having a corrosive effect in the US and Western Europe, but in much of the rest of the world, and counterintuitively, this shocked me, it's having a positive effect. At least according to the observational or correlational studies that we've done so far. So to me, that says we need more research, right? Unsurprising, the professor is going to ask for more research, but you've heard how wrong I am all the time. So Chentao, it sounds like you have a good dissertation project if you continue to go on into a PhD program, but especially in the context you mentioned, China, right? It's a profoundly different political system, as you mentioned, different levels of availability of sort of public discourse, and certainly different pressures, and certainly work to be done on Turkey, Russia, other places as well. Yeah, great question.
Exactly, my home country, Turkey. So definitely. With that, I want to turn it over also to Alex, who's monitoring the questions. We have tons of them again. Alex, if you could maybe share the one that's they want us to ask the most first.
Yeah, there are a lot of popular follow-up questions about the platform design, and I know you spoke about that a little bit. But I think that, a lot of people in the audience are coming from a marketing background. And as marketers, people think a lot about what sort of works, what content performs the best. And I think a lot of the platforms are designed around, rewarding content that performs well and kind of reinforcing that. So I think it seems like a lot of the polarization that we see comes from like the most extreme content, or that's the common narrative. So I guess, has your research shown that that is true? And then like, is there some sort of interventions or changes to the platform design that might reduce the problem of polarization if the platforms weren't designed to reward extreme content?
Yeah, sure. It's a really tricky question. Again, doing research on this is really hard. What we'd like to do is walk into every social media platform and take one algorithm, right, and then compare it to another algorithm and have thousands and thousands of people use them. This is a really rare thing. It's hard to do. Um, Companies are generally loath to let us do that. Interestingly, last year, Facebook, or 2 years ago, 4 years ago, Facebook allowed a large group of researchers to study the effects of algorithms on the 2020 presidential election. And you might be suspicious of Facebook being involved, and certainly some people are. But the findings, which came out in pretty reputable journals like Science and Nature, once again suggests that the algorithms actually have pretty limited effect on people's political decisions. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that. It could be that by the time they had started the study, most people had already made up their minds about the elections, or it could be that this was more impactful earlier in the story of social media, or maybe Facebook had fixed some of these problems by the time the study went into the field. But it suggests that no single thing is going to do the job, and that's why we think what's really important about hitting reset and thinking about these things from a design perspective is we spent too long thinking about the effects of one single company in one single place at one single point in time. And earlier I was saying that we now think we know that the effects of these things are sort of heterogeneous across different contexts. Well, it would follow that probably different contexts need different kinds of designs and different kinds of interventions. So an effective social media site in China would, to Chen Tao's question, would look very different than one in Tanzania probably. So to do that, the challenge is we can't then work with a company like Meta or certainly not Twitter, which won't even share the data with us anymore, to figure this out. And that's why we created this new environment, because we thought, what's really needed is to say, okay, well, let's start from the science. What do we know? What works? One thing, folks who ask these questions who have a marketing background might be interested to know about is the role of AI in this space. And a lot of us are really worried about AI and what it might do to politics, especially given that, I read the other day, 70% of the world's population is voting this year, right? And we've all heard about, scary stories about, say, robocalls pretending to be Joe Biden, stuff like that. But AI, we think, might also be part of the solution. So in a study that we recently published called Leveraging AI for Democratic Discourse, what we found is that when we put an LLM in between two people and use it to offer them recommendations about how to make their messages that they're about to send to their partner, the people they're talking to, a little less polarizing, that people like them, they use them, and perhaps most importantly, when they use them, the people they're talking to consider the conversation to be much more productive, much less stressful, and want to have more conversations with people who don't disagree with them, which is pretty hard to do. So, I think the question we all need to be asking is, now we have all these exciting new tools. There's clear potential for harm, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater either. We want to start thinking about how can we counteract a lot of the bad stuff that we know is coming, especially when we can't hire, unlimited content moderators to fix this problem. So that's one example of the type of design that I think could be promising.
Yeah, can you speak to, just quickly in our last couple of minutes, like sort of your outlook on the feasibility and kind of motivation on the part of the big platforms to like implement some of these changes? Like it's clear that there is maybe some kernels of hope in terms of technology, like what you're just talking about. And we've seen some positive steps, and we've seen some kind of pushes on the part of government to implement some of these changes. But then we've also sort of seen ways that the profit motive on the part of these big companies maybe kind of keeps them also moving towards a lot of polarizing content. So what do you kind of see as the outlook for that balance, or perhaps, some of these interventions moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's the right question. Look, these are businesses at the end of the day, and much as I could criticize them from the ivory tower. Many colleagues, friends, former students now work in these places. So I'm acutely aware that if we want a solution to scale, right? Much as many of us might not like it, we probably have to think about how they make money too. So earlier I was talking about the Venn diagram where we try to identify solutions. They're also, you know either at least don't threaten some of the profit driven behaviors of corporations, but may even create new ones. So for example, before Elon bought Twitter, we were able to work with the previous administration, if I can say that, to implement that consensus based algorithm that I was talking about, that led to a 25 to 35% drop in the sharing of misinformation on the platform. Now, Facebook alone spends probably $1 billion a year on content moderation. So if you can create a 25 to 35% drop, that's big money. But also that kind of consensus-based ranking, right? It's not just eat your broccoli, here's what the other side is saying, and you need to listen to it. It's also, hey, what are you missing out on that lots of other people who are different than you seem to like? And that sort of taps into another all too human tendency, which is sort of our fear of missing out, right? And so if social media can usefully help us identify things that lots of other people are finding useful, engaging, or interesting, right? That's why many of us come to social media in the first place, and the platforms aren't catering to that need. So, that's another example of how I think we can populate that Venn diagram. In the meantime, we can all support, if you haven't tried them yet, Blue Sky, Mastodon, even Threads, which is integrating with the Fediverse and maybe more open to innovation in the space and decentralized than so many of the others. If you want to get away from the profit maximization, that's the way to go in the long term. But we really need to see if these things can scale. So we need to be doing both.
Yeah,
Thank you
that's
so
a great place to leave it, I think. And I think Blue Sky just went invite free yesterday or the day before, right?
Right.
Everybody can get on there.
Sounds
well,
good.
thank you so much, Professor Christopher Bale. Again, I'm going to show the book because I want to encourage everyone to read Breaking the Social Media Prism after this event too. We've dived a little bit into it, but the book itself is fantastic. And it really challenges some of our assumptions. I think the research approach itself is very innovative. And please also follow the work of Polarization Lab to generating really thoughtful solutions as well as insights at the Duke University. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Now we transition into our next session. And again, we have 3 back-to-back talks. But as we transition there, I just want to quickly kind of engage with you, those of you who are participating. We want to get a sense of your own sentiments about social media. Today, we're going to talk a lot about different aspects of our interactions and life with social media. So again, using the platform that we were using in the beginning and we'll use throughout the session, Slido, we would like to kind of gauge how you feel about social media yourself. We're asking you to use one emoji to describe your feelings for social media. Again, emojis themselves are interesting communicative tools and symbols that have proliferated since our engagement and more engagement with social media and other digital media tools as well. So please share that with us, and you'll be able to see as you participate your answers, others' answers as well. And I'm seeing that people are starting to populate this platform too. So please use it to interact with one another. And we'll have small kind of interjections of interactivity throughout the session, just to gather your sentiments too. Again, our first emoji is a heart. So with that, again, I just want to quickly remind you as we move on to session 2, we are at Communication Leadership Connects, our annual professional learning event organized by Communication Leadership Master's Program at the University of Washington. And we offer a lot of the discussions that you're hearing today in our program. And we are housed again in Seattle, University of Washington. And we are very much exploring social media itself as it evolves. But today we're really trying to answer those new questions and trying to make sense of it. collectively. So session 1 kicked us off with asking questions about political engagement, polarization, and social media. A very important question, as Professor Bale mentioned. Majority of the world's population will vote this year. There's hesitation of interaction. There are questions of what tools to use, whether to keep our social media accounts, how to evolve our engagement, as well as, of course, the complicated environment that he laid out here as well. That's, I think, very, very important. So with that, we are going to move on to our next session. But before we do, we want to kind of also, again, engage you one more time and gather your thoughts about what do you use, what type of social media usage, and what do you use the most in terms of social media using Slido. We have one more activity for you as we kind of launch into more questions around social media usage. So using Slido in just a few minutes, you're going to get to engage and also tell us a little bit about your social media usage.
Can we do an emoji recap first, Ken?
Of course, please do.
I want to see what people put there. I saw a skull. Yeah, the grimace face definitely describes me.
Exactly. The hearts that we started with are not as much represented. There are some hearts, but there's also a lot of deliberation and thought. And you're also seeing on your screens that we're highlighting some of your comments as we move forward too. So please continue to share with us those as well. So quickly again, next up is a quick interactive activity coming up where we'll ask you about your social media usage and the types of tools that you'll use there, and we'll bring up the results of that. Keep tuned into Slido. They'll switch to that question in a minute, and we'll bring up the answers just in a few minutes. I think that question now is available. We want to get a sense of how active you all are. We discussed a little bit about the speculation and the mood towards maybe us stepping away from social media, right? Turning off, as Professor Christopher Bale talked about as well. But is that really the case, right? How active we are, how minimal we use these tools, how maybe some of us signed off. So there is that complexity as well. So please keep contributing. At the moment, we have more active users than minimal users, but maybe that will change, and I will keep referencing this back too, and you'll see each other's responses too. So keep the Slido channel active. Now, with that, I want to introduce to you all what's coming up next. And we have another session filled with insightful revelations about our relationship to social media. In the second session, we're going to talk a little bit about organizations. Again, we have a lot of communication and marketing professionals with us today. And we're going to dive deep into your practice. We have 3 outstanding speakers. We're going to start with Kelly Myers in just a minute, and then Hannah Teresa Park and Rob Salkowitz. And just a note that, again, as we are discussing these topics, they're all bringing their unique perspectives. Kelly will start us off about considerations for legacy brands in Gen Z and how they interact with that audience, to Hannah Teresa Park's talk about social impact and community, to concluding our conversation with Rob Salkowitz's discussion around influencers, AI, and the changing landscape of marketing and communication as well. So these 3 talks will be back to back. They're, again, very much lesson-like, so you're here to learn with us. But we'll come back in between each of these lessons to engage you all. Again, use Slido throughout to share your questions. We'll do a collective Q&A at the very end after we hear these lessons. So we have a few hours of intense learning, and I'm so thrilled for that. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex to kick off session 2 and introduce our next speaker.
Yes, thank you, Ken. Our next speaker is Kelly Myers. She's going to dig deep into Gen Z legacy brands and social media. She's an esteemed member of our faculty. She teaches a class called Leadership at All Levels and a number of other classes. And in her professional life, she is the head of social media for consumer brands at Microsoft, which is just a little local company you might have heard of. Kelly's 18 years as a senior leader encompasses building complex consumer strategies, advanced social media activations, and global digital marketing campaigns, all built on data insights and analytics. Kelly's going to dive deep into her work navigating a legacy brand with Gen Z. So before I pass it off to Kelly, just a reminder, as Akin said, you can put your questions in that Q&A tab on Slido. We're going to do the Q&A for Kelly, Hannah, Teresa, and Rob Salkowitz all at the very end of their talks. So feel free to indicate that you have a question specifically for one of them, or we'll be able to infer who it's for and or share it with everybody. So put your questions in Slido, put your comments in YouTube, and with that, I'll hand it over to Kelly. Thank you so much for being here with us. We're so excited to hear from you.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex and Ken. This is great. I'm so excited to be here today. As you mentioned, I am at Microsoft. I work in social, and I happen to be very passionate about our friends at Gen Z. So with that, I will go ahead and kick off here. I think, love the slides, all the complexity. So did you guys know that AARP is on TikTok? AARP is an organization that's focused on older Americans, over 50, to be precise. However, last year they began posting on TikTok. In an article, their senior director of social media shared that they were focused on Gen X. Now, I recognize Gen Z and Gen X are not the same, but it's the generation that's turning 50, Americans born between 1965 and 1980. This offers up two truths for me that are sitting in the same space. One, AARP is future focused on growing market share by targeting the next generation of members. And TikTok isn't just for Gen X or Gen Z. It's for all of us. That's the reason we're all on TikTok. TikTok's grown significantly over the last several years, and more Americans turn to it for news, for information, for shopping, for travel, for therapy. I find myself, thanks to the algorithms, on rescue horse TikTok quite often. I don't have horses, nor have I ever rescued one, but for some reason that algorithm finds me each and every time. However, more Americans use social media in some form. As Professor Bale shared, we all do. And 62% of 18 to 29-year-olds say that they use TikTok, which is far higher than any other share of other generations. Gen Z, as we all know, is one of the most diverse, digitally savvy, and potentially vocal generations. As Alex mentioned, my name's Kelly. I lead social for Microsoft for consumer brands. I'm one of many media directors who do the same work. And I also teach leadership within the program here at UW. I'm excited to share with you specifically about the ways that the brands that I lead help connect us to Generation Z, the future of what is happening in technology. We're going to talk about the Oddfellow, that pairing of legacy brands like Microsoft and Gen Z, while being at that large brand and making sure that we're connecting with what's happening. So I know that I work for a tech company. We both started in the 70s. It's a solid Gen X. We've got a touch of gray hair, but old doesn't mean that we're old. And old school doesn't mean we're actually going to do things that are an old or negative way. We make fewer mistakes than we did when we were younger, but what research shows is that today's generations are embracing the low tech and the retro aspect, and because they're looking to find that relief in an overly connected world. I think that's part of what Professor Bale shared. We are so connected right now, and how do we find some places for respite and relaxation? We also know that Windows is the most used operating system in the world. There are billions and billions of people. In marketing today, it requires a really high production value. You'll see videos, you'll see commercials, what you see in the retail space, et cetera, are all things that are done beautifully and produced so well. I'm very proud of the work that comes out of our marketing teams and our studios. However, for social, we know that the lo-fi is what becomes the reaction we see most. It's different. We have the opportunity to inspire and engage daily. I do not recommend that. That's the algorithms will deprecate branded content if it's too often out there. But you're creating that consistency. And when you create that consistency, you connect with your audiences. Specifically for Gen Z, it means for us to be as authentic as possible. And we go lo-fi. Research shows that adults under 30 are more likely to use multiple platforms. So we haven't gone all in on TikTok or all in on X or all in on Instagram. We certainly look across each of those platforms in ways that make sense and relate to what's happening to our audiences at that moment. This screen grab is from our Instagram from last fall, which is technically the back to school sales motion. So within major companies who have the student as an audience or as a target or B, they're trying to actually make sure we're sharing information like where should you go buy your next laptop, all of that stuff. We would look odd if that's all we shared. If all we presented was, here's the next deal, here's the next place to buy. And instead we talk about how they can use Windows in a relatable fashion. That may be using memes or trends. It might be really simplifying the message down to a shortcut. If you use Control X, you can cut something. Reasons why they can use a journal app. All things that we find are highly relatable to our customer experiences in social, and it still supports the back to school marketing motion, but in a way that feels like I could share that, or I could say, high five, or tell someone, oh, Windows gets me and they see me. The next insight I have is that nostalgia should be audience-led, not brand-led. A lot of us here in marketing communications, our job is to tell people what is new and improved. If anybody's been in any ad law or media law class, there are all certain qualifiers on how to use that. We want to shout about the benefits and the features, value props of what we're hoping to sell. Marketers, by the very nature of it, hate nostalgia. I am a marketer. I do love nostalgia because I'm also a rebel in that space. But when it's led by an audience, it fits. Everything old is new again, and Gen Z wants to make it right. They are kinder and gentler to what's come before them. They're healthy. They're doing therapy. They're drinking water. They're taking their greens and their vitamins. My own Gen Z FaceTimed me recently and asked me if her outfit was good for a Y2K party. I said, great, layer on another tank, and you're probably good to go. Nostalgia itself is defined as something that's warm and cozy. I think of it as being a familiarity that just brings a smile or fondness to what you have to share. For us, that has been a tried and true effort, which is the Microsoft Ugly Sweaters. And I have a few here because I have all of them. Last year, we saw trends around Clippy coming back. And so we had Clippy as a sweater. And this year we did the Bliss, which is actually the most viewed photograph in the world. It's the landscape itself. Every time we release the Windows Ugly Sweater, we're reminded of two things. Americans and globally really love ugly sweaters around the holiday time period. And Windows, because it has such strong legacy connections, really gives that nostalgia component more than if it's just something else. It's not a product, you can't hold it. And so the sweaters for us is a way to connect that physical and digital world together. We've done Minesweeper, we've done Clippy, we've done Bliss, we've done everything that we can to think about really connecting Windows to folks. And it actually allows us to pull those generations together. So you'll see people who used Windows for the first time in 1986, who now are parents of someone who's using it today. The third one I have for you is let's stop pretending that Gen Z millennials aren't rebellious, childless beings. I think there's definitely a sense where you'll see a lot of consternation. I think that Gen X feels sometimes that we had it hard. We were tough. We were the latchkey kids. But the truth is that our Gen Z partners and friends and family members are pet parents and plant parents and parent parents. And we need to actually recognize that and respect their lived experiences. It's a really big insight for me. I think during the pandemic, we were all exposed to one whether they're more. In my own household, I had high schoolers at the time who, instead of branching out and doing their own thing, were actually joining me for 3 meals a day. And so I think there's a lot that we should give them credit for as they've kind of gone out into this world, especially this post-pandemic world. A lot of younger generations are still saving and looking at different experiences and different purchases than we did in previous generations. And I think that it's the pursuit of happiness and making memories that they're actually really focused on. And I love to see that. Gen Z is really looking at how they're creating this together and making it attainable for each of us. In doing that, one of the things that we try to do is really live authentically and find that connectedness within some of the people we feature in our creative. This was one that we used a real life team. It's called MEM. It's a kids wear that looks at upcycling and recycling clothing that celebrates young people for who they are. It's definitely in a gender neutral space, but it allows us to show and connect our brand storytelling with their own storytelling, which tends to be a really important factor with how Gen Z connects to brands. They want to be able to see themselves and their values within that brand as well. The fourth area I would share with you is that there's a place for imperfection, even in premium tech brands. Like I mentioned earlier, when we think about these really beautiful, large commercial-led product and marketing efforts, they're beautiful and they're done with such perfection. And I love that. And there's a place for them and we need that. But the authenticity that brings me here is that there's always a place for it, especially in social. Back to my earlier comments, we like neat and tidy for brand ready materials. It's really refreshing and a little frightening for my brand marketing friends to see some of the stuff we send out into the world. You know, people who have filters over their faces singing a song, or potentially something where it's, you know, an older version or a different version where we're actually sharing the truth of who we are as well. That curation is something that's important for social media and is important for connecting with consumers and audiences in that space. I think that's why we also saw the rise of Be Real, that platform that's been around. Although I'm hearing folks are kind of tired of taking pictures of themselves, but I do appreciate that it was this spot where there was a filterless experience. We definitely have channeled some of this in some of our favorite comedic tropes. One of them was working from home, right? Are we working from home or are we living at work? You are all sitting in my house right now with me. And it's just this, you know, completely unforgiving and raw space that we all sort of live in. And so we can do that with technology. We can do, you know, jokes about teams and connecting and chat. We can do all those things because they're relatable. And that's actually what a lot of people find really beautiful about it. One of the ways we do that is we encourage a lot of user-generated content. I'm sure all of you have used MS Paint at some point in your lives. And the thing about MS Paint is that it's one of the very first computer programs that people can actually showcase art. And when we show this and share this is from our X and Windows platform, we give everybody a chance to have a platform. It feels good to have someone recognize you for what you've tried to do and share. The other one in this is a little bit of nostalgia again. I think these are Beanie Babies. And it was a shout out to all of our 90s people and what they can do. So here we are playing in this very authentic, lo-fi, low-tech world that recognizes where a lot of people are in their day-to-day lives. And when you think back to all of the algorithm conversations that we've talked about, each platform allows you to share these differently. These are all from X, and they're all places where people come back and tag us because they want to use MS Paint and how to use it. Some folks are really amazingly incredible at it. I don't think that I could do much with it at this point in time, but they're fun nonetheless. The fifth one I would share is trying trends on for size. Trending content in social media is a risk. It always is a risk. There are things that will go beautifully well. There are things that will flop. One of the ones that we had that did beautifully was the how it started and how it's going trend from a couple years ago. Internet Explorer is the previous version of the Edge browser. And so we're able to put both logos up and it just went beautifully. The trends that we try on, they're oftentimes we call them social branter. It's social media managers kind of seeing like for like out in the space. One of the ones we've done recently also was the one word trend. Our friends at Amtrak started it. It said just trains. And so we were able to do that for all of our brands as well. And it really made sense. Trends, however, are only relatable when they work for your brand. And I think that that's where the brand marketing and brand understanding comes in. Because if you don't understand how your brand would react in a situation, you might actually fall into a trend that doesn't work very well. One of the ones that we did last year, we tested out and tried was the trend Study With Me. It's a hashtag Study With Me. It happens on YouTube as well as on TikTok. An audience will tune in with a favorite creator to help them find focus. Share study tips, and kind of keep each other accountable. It's sort of just this way of we're not together physically, but I want to have someone help me go down and just, focus on studying. So with finals in full swing, we actually did it with Windows last year, where we could use a feature within Windows, which is called Focus Assist, to help somebody actually study. And then we tried out a live on TikTok, and it was fun. This is one of somebody on my team who's wearing the Clippy suit. There were some interactive ways. There were some things to talk through. There was some cool lo-fi music playing, but it was a study session. We teased it out on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And it actually went really well. It was small and it was a test. We might try it again, but this is a way where you can look at trends that are happening within your core audience, this one being the studying and students, and finding a way to really connect that. Once again, Windows is a legacy brand. People are building massive systems and games and all sorts of things, but it's the simplest spot was, how do we find a way to relate to students who are studying right now? And how can we help them with actually the technology that we have? Lastly, I want to bring this all together for you, which is sort of opening up windows for the masses, but mainly for Gen Z. In the last few years, we've made a very concerted effort to really grow the Gen Z audience. There are some tools that we use that allow us to see and track generational profiles within our social media platforms. And I've watched as the generational profile for Windows has shifted from a boomer Gen X to now it's growing more with our Gen Z. This takes years to do. It's not quick. It's not with one post or one tweet or one video, things will change. But there certainly is a way to think through and be smart and strategic how to gather in and garner the generation that you want to do. One of the ways we talked about that was TikTok. So during the pandemic, I think many of us probably saw TikTok rise, and it went from being, dances and these kind of catchy pieces to a more thoughtful product. I will say that as a brand, TikTok still has some challenges in terms of reporting and analytics, things that I would like to see as an enterprise. But it certainly is one that we've had a lot of fun. I didn't want to go out onto TikTok haphazardly. I think there was so much desire from internal teams to be on TikTok, but I knew that it was going to be a big endeavor. It takes a lot and it requires a lot from a production perspective, from a commenting perspective, from just a time perspective. And TikTok is the only platform we use currently that requires you to use it on one phone or one device. So you can't actually operationalize it to make it a little bit more efficient. All that's good. It's all fun, but we definitely got there. So when we went out the door with Windows 11, we used that as the marketing moment to push us into TikTok. We thought this would be the right space, the right time, the right opportunity. We have a brand new operating system. We've got this great, brand. How are we going to put it together in a space that's really focused on a Gen Z target? And I'm really proud of the work that occurred here. We reached 1 million followers in 9 months. And it certainly is interesting because from a community perspective, this is huge, right? There were not 1 million people who wanted to raise their hands and say, yeah, I'd love to watch more content by, for, or about Windows. And so strategically, the way that we approached it was around these 4 pillars. We looked at owned content. So this is content we were creating, things that we would want to share out and into the world. We looked at creator content, which is really important. I think a lot of you probably follow creators. I follow creators, but understanding how to use that strategically was really important. We looked at paid. So what kind of media could we purchase to help support that? And then obviously at user-generated content. One of the things that we say on the team often is you can't have a content strategy without a comment strategy. So all 4 of these really played into that launch moment. And the funny thing about TikTok is that I could look at the content we produce on TikTok and I am right about 50% of the time if it's going to be well received by the audience. It's still, there are things that I look at and I shake my head and I'm like, there you go, that's fine, it's great. But at the same time, it's one of those platforms where we're there and we're participating and we're still doing so in a way that really makes sense for us. One of the tactics that we took was really focusing on creators. At the time that we were starting the Windows launch plan for all of this, Emily Zagay, who many of you may have seen, was one of the very first creators to kind of start to do these videos on logos. She was taking her graphics background and making logos for brands like McDonald's, we asked for Windows. She did it for other companies as well. And so the plan was that we would go out each and every day and tag her on one of her videos and ask her to do a logo for Windows. We probably got a little thirsty. I think we did it for far longer than we were comfortable with, but we were kind of bedded down on this was going to be cool. This was going to be great for us. We're going to make it happen. And so each and every day, we would tag one of her videos. We followed only her. So if you actually go to TikTok today, you look at Windows, we still only follow Emily. And she finally put us into a video, which we, of course, we're excited about. We took that video and stitched it and made a deep fake where we put her logo design, which was her face in the 4 squares of the Windows logo. And we popped it up onto the Microsoft Experience Center in downtown New York. Took a picture, reposted it again, and then that just kind of started this really wonderful collaboration with her that has gone on now for several years. She comes back and forth she shares things with us, and we go back and forth oftentimes. it allows us to really remain true to the roots that we have and our awareness in the brand, because her creative endeavors ahead of the launch were just spot on. They were perfect. Because we were borrowing that cultural credibility, not trying to buy it, it actually allowed for a really healthy brand perception to shift within TikTok on for Windows, which is really cool. We also then welcomed her onto Twitter. She came and joined in February 2022. We're the only account that she follows. But the really cool part about trying to kind of go through and tie this together was that we were able to then also send her her own personalized device. So we worked with our product teams and our PR teams, and we shared this with her and sent her a note and called her bestie. We continue to see that pop up for us. Some of our friends in Xbox have sent her devices. We've seen some other teams send her things. And she hilariously only calls out Windows to thank when it comes to this sort of work and this effort. She's been a great boost for us, I would say, from an data perspective. We've had over 126 million earned impressions on the content, and it was done in really good faith and good nature. And I think it goes back to, once again, really understanding the brand, understanding the audience, and seeing where there's a way for us to play in that space and not feel like we've sort of jumped into, the bottom end of the pool. Creators for us are really humanizing an operating system. Windows is an operating system. I'm using it right now. Many of you might be using it as well. And so by using creators, we actually get to grow and engage just for the brand itself. For anybody who shares the Windows content on their page, we actually see more and more audience members coming forward, which is great. That nostalgia-driven content that we use is really building brand love. Brand love is it's the ephemeral quality that we all want to achieve when it comes to social. Social media, you're participating in the space of everybody, right? It's goat videos, it's kid pictures, it's first birthdays, it's anniversaries, it's weddings. And so when we enter into that space, we always want to do so in a way that feels like we've earned the right to be there, and that we're not stepping in and stepping on toes in it as well. And then having that reactive participation is really key. That's what we use to follow and grow our base of fans. So as you can see, we truly, really value our audiences and creators to help us stay on top of what's happening in social. We're inspired by Gen Z, and I think that's where we get a lot of the content and a lot of the curiosity for what's happening. We're definitely pushing the envelope. We're bearing the lead. And we're dragging an entire marketing team along with us. Whenever I come up with a new idea, I often get but we want to talk about the new stuff. I'm like, that's great, but there's this trend where these people are talking about this, and we should talk about that instead. I hope that the content we have really provides that digestible information in relatable ways that looks to connect the community and connect TikTok, and not just that, but other platforms as well with Gen Z. We're always testing out that content. We're always looking at other ways for ideas to push things out. And it can be a pretty low barrier to entry when you're testing things out. I would encourage you to do it as well. We've seen works well for Twitter, might not work for TikTok, it might not work well for Instagram, but we can trade out and play in those spaces as well. Overall, the things to take away, old school doesn't mean old. Don't be afraid to try that out. Nostalgia is here to stay. People will continue to pick that up. Don't dismiss the lived experiences of Gen Z or your younger millennial audiences. They have real, authentic areas that we can all look at and connect with. Being real is being authentic, and definitely trying out some of those trends. With that kind of covers the content I have for today so far. It's a lot when you think about these big brands and how we sort of connect social together with all of that. But it's one where there's just so much ripe opportunity for us to continue to grow and to continue to connect with Gen Z. And we're even starting to think about, okay, what's Gen Alpha? What comes next? And how do we think about that? At the same time, understanding we're a legacy brand, and how do we continue to connect and create and build authenticity and affinity for a brand, knowing that there are future generations ahead of us to reach out and to connect with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. This is so insightful. I think diving deep into how strategy around social media evolves is a rare glimpse that we all get to have. So thank you so much again for your thoughtful evaluation, as well as also ways for us to consider Gen Z in ways maybe I really appreciated that too, holistically as humans, as complex humans as they are. So thank you so much. Again, we're going to get to ask questions to Kelly and all our session 2 speakers at the end. We have a ton of questions, so feel free to go back and ask your questions or vote questions that you'd like us to hear. But thank you again, Kelly. See you shortly.
Thank you.
So we're going to transition to our next speaker, but before we do, I just wanted to do a couple reminders. I mentioned that you should share your questions with us, but then the other reminder that I have is this is a very interactive live streamed event, again, produced by students and faculty of Communication Leadership Program who are engaged in producing this event live right now. And they've designed for us a space to interact and reflect together about today's very rich learnings. I already learned so much that I'm trying to take many notes and trying to keep all this information fresh on my mind, but I'm looking forward to myself with interacting with you. I'll be there too. At gather.town is the platform we'll use. It allows you to engage in a space, and our students designed this space. You can see each other and talk to one another. I have a very cute avatar on this space too. And on those walls that you're seeing, our students have generated interesting questions, reflection questions inspired by today's topic and today's conversation. So you already see some of our students are there. You'll get to pick a virtual table to join at the end of the event and reflect on one of the questions there live if you're joining us live and watching this live. So that's an added component that we wanted to share with you and reflects on the kind of new ways of interacting as well. So with that, we again encourage you all, and we'll share with you how to join there as well, gather.town, and we are also going to share with you that invitation. The next bit is, and I want to invite Alex too, is to kind of, again, continue learning from all of you. Last session at the connection from Christopher Bale's conversation to Kelly's conversation, we asked you a question about your engagement on social media using Slido. We want to kind of get a sense of also what the answers were there. So as you saw, again, with us today, joining live, we have a number of people who are actively active users, and actually the top category, Alex, I don't know if you're surprised by it, but I was one of them too. So that was my answer too. I am an active user, but considering reducing time that I spend with social media, of course, due to the nature of my work, that's not always possible. But what about you? What did you pick?
I think this is a self-selecting group of people who are attending this, who are professional communicators and marketers. We sort of have to be on social media as part of our jobs to be monitoring the channels that we might be managing. So we might be considering reducing our time spent, but I do think I'm kind of surprised at how low the number is of people who have abandoned social media altogether. I feel like personally, I know quite a few people who at least have professed to do that, but there's always that trope of the person who's proclaims on social media that they're quitting social media, and then a couple of weeks later they're back there again, and they've quietly returned. So it certainly, I think we've observed a lot of people who are trying to take steps back or reduce its impact on their lives and on their mental health as well. But certainly it's something that still plays a prevalent role in all of our lives and our interactions, and is just a big part of the ways that we communicate and the ways that we work.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I think, interesting too, because we're live right now also on LinkedIn, right? So there's a proliferation of types of platforms as well. We use different social media for different reasons. I know Kelly left us off with a little bit of engagement on TikTok. I'm still not a TikTok native by any means, but I'm a light lurker. But I also am, again, I think generational interaction is also proliferating. So these decisions are very, very complex, to say the least.
For sure. Yeah. TikTok is the one that I've avoided. There's that meme about, I'm an adult, so I don't watch TikTok. I watch TikToks on Reels 2 weeks later after they're popular on TikTok. But yeah, there's certainly these generational differences. I really appreciated Kelly sharing insights into how a giant brand like Windows is marketing and thinking about the way that they manage, and just like the idea that the Windows TikTok is just on one person's phone. And
Mhm.
it's just wild to think about how a big brand like that is managing those social media channels and how the strategy is laid out. So it was great to have her pull back the curtain.
And with that, maybe I'm going to engage us now before we move on to our next very esteemed speaker to a quick quiz, if that's okay. So we're going to ask you a question and give you a quick the chance to answer on Slido, and the quiz will ask you a question about the most social media. What is the most the social media platform with the most active users in 2023. I think we're going to see that in just 1 minute on the screen too. And we'll give you some time to answer, and we'll actually watch it live too as it unfolds. So the options are Facebook, X-Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. So those are the options. And what do you think? This is just a quick, you don't have to look it up, but in your intuitive,
Okay. No Googling.
No Googling. What do you think is the most social media platform with the most monthly active users as of 2023, given we just recently got into 2024? So this is recent data. And in just a few seconds, we're going to show you what that is. So
what do you think is the one, while people are thinking about their answer, what is the one that you spend the most time on, Akin?
I spend a lot of time on Instagram, but I don't know if it will be the answer. But I personally, so interesting. So it's TikTok, Facebook, followed by Twitter, Instagram, and Twitter. Alex, do you know the right answer?
Oh, I think it was just revealed that, in fact, our audience.
Exactly. It is Facebook. And it's interesting, right? Facebook's, I think, global resonance and potential and also cross-generational use is a really interesting case. As we dive deep in the previous conversation, a little bit about emerging tools. And again, as you mentioned, Kelly's thoughtful kind of strategic discussion about how to engage with social media brands in consideration of proliferation of cross-generational audiences. We're going to now dive deep into a really related, actually, an interesting topic, and it has to do with Facebook. Actually, part of the story has to do with Facebook. So next up, I'm going to invite Hannah Teresa Park, who's, again, another esteemed faculty member in our program. And we're going to talk to Hannah Teresa Park will talk to us about authentic communities, engagement, and social impact. And she's the person to talk about it because her work is very much embedded in this field. She is the founder of Mujeres del Futuro, a digital safe space of belonging that centers around the potential of Latinas in digital economy. And this particular initiative, through innovative interjections, Mujeres del Futuro helped Latinas generate over $1.5 million in revenue in their digital initiatives. Currently, Hannah Teresa Park is the executive director of a nonprofit social first media organization with over 5 million subscribers dedicated to uplifting the Latino community in the US. So I want to welcome Hannah, and we're so thrilled to learn from Hannah today, and looking forward to hearing her insights and actually engaging with her about this very, maybe at first, I don't know if you would call it a social experiment that generated so much social impact. Welcome, Hannah, and we look forward to learning from you.
Thank you so much, Akin and Alex. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here, and I want to start off by acknowledging every single one of you because you chose to spend your time with us, and your presence is co-creating this space where learning and connection can happen. So I want to acknowledge every single one of you for sharing your time and presence. And with that, let's get started. Let's talk about the question that really sparked all of this was, is it really possible to create a safe space of belonging using social media? And can the social media creating this sense of belonging drive social impact? And further, we thought, Could those social impacts transcend from digital spaces to physical world? And I hope that by telling and sharing this story with you all, we get some inspiration and how this may be possible. With that, I want to start off by asking you all this question. When, where, and who were you with the last time that you felt you were safe to be your full self? You knew that it was safe, that you could be your goofy, bubbly, quirky self, and it was safe to be that way. When was the last time that you felt that you could practice something without any fear? You could learn things freely, like we were children, where we could just jump in the puddle and allow ourselves to learn freely. When was the last time, and where were you, and who were you with when you were fully embraced for simply being? Drop in the chat the memory that comes up in your mind when I ask you when and where and who were you with the last time you felt this. I see in the comment that you felt this in a kid's class, for example. So keep those answers coming. And as we look at those answers, the experience of the spaces of belonging will fall into one of these four categories. You may have felt a sense of belonging in a public space because you saw yourself reflected, your quirks, your likes, your way of being reflected in the public spaces you were part of. You may have felt this way if you were in a social space that shared an interest or a passion, as we're seeing some of those here in the comments, like in an improv class, for example. Or it could have happened in a personal space through connections and relationships with your friends or families, or in intimate spaces with those that we have intimate connections where we're fully seen and felt and understood. So with this, let's explore what happens when you're torn away from these incredibly important experience and spaces of belonging. We start experiencing othering, and I want us to think about othering as a set of dynamic process and systems that create marginalization and exclusion. And that in that space of othering, we can feel our identities are being challenged, our passions, who we are, our identities are in question. And it perpetuates structural systems of inequities because it's marginalizing and judging and making judgment of who we are as human beings. And I can speak firsthand that I've experienced othering and not belonging. As a first generation Asian Latina immigrant who now lives in the United States, being born in Korea and grew my formative years in Honduras, Central America, and then immigrating for the second time here to the United States, I understood firsthand what it felt to never be Asian enough, to never be Latina enough, and to never feel like I was American enough. And I saw myself slowly contorting to fit in, staying silent in the sidelines simply to survive. And I saw firsthand the impact that not belonging has in oneself and how we show up and participate. And this lack of sense of belonging has very, very serious impact. It has impact on our well-being. You know, there are studies that show that sense of not belonging increases our level of stress, which has impact in our mental health well-being. It also has tangible financial impact. In the case of Latinas, we see that Latinas are earning 55 to 60 cents for every dollar earned by white non-Hispanic men. And it also can have a very significant impact in the future economy. Over 50% of the potential jobs over 50% of Latinos will be shut out or underprepared for 86% of the jobs by 2045. This is devastating. So this made us think, as a social entrepreneur who has worked on creating businesses that drive social impact with a background in behavioral science, how to design communication campaigns that will drive behavioral change with a deep, profound commitment to social impact and justice. I had a burning question, which was, can we cultivate a safe space of belonging using social media? And here is how Mujeres del Futuro was born. Mujeres del Futuro was born with the vision and the mission to create a safe space of belonging and mutual care that centers the potential of Latinas as leaders shaping the future. And we had 5 important building blocks of belonging, which I would love to walk you through in this presentation. The first building block was clarity on who. Who can we best serve and who could best benefit from the community of safe belonging that we will create. The second was, how do we shift our members from consumers of social media to creators of social media? How do we move our members from lurking to creating and from scrolling to sharing? The third building block was language of belonging. How do we co-create and social norm language of belonging that fosters safety and community? Fourth building block of belonging was deepening these connections. How can we create spaces that deepen these connections through practice and learning? And the fifth was, can we truly take and transcend these impact from digital space to physical space? So let's dive in and look at each of these building blocks of belonging more closely. The first one is clarity on who. We initiated this Mujeres del Futuro project by conducting a qualitative research to identify clearly who can we best serve and who would benefit the most from this safe space of belonging we would create using social media. So we had to look at what are those barriers that avoid us from having that sense of belonging. The first one that we saw was around gender and ethnicity. So we wanted to focus Mujeres del Futuro for Latina women. The second barrier to belonging that we saw was language. A lot of the members of Mujeres del Futuro are bicultural and bilingual. However, what ties us together is that we are Spanish prefer. Oftentimes, if you are multilingual, drop it in the chat. Oftentimes, we have different personalities, different tones. You know, there's a famous quote by Sofia Vergara who says, if you only knew how smart I was in Spanish. There are parts of our identities that oftentimes are not fully expressed across different languages when you're multilingual. And we realized that we wanted to serve Latina women who prefer Spanish because that was the language of their soul. The third was that our audience and member was going through a life-changing event. So they were experiencing major life-changing or pivoting moments, whether that be in their personal or professional life. It could be becoming a new mother or going through a divorce or going through a moment of grief or shifting jobs or opening a new business. These were all major life-changing events where they may feel that they're not belonging to a safe space of support and mutual care. And that leads us to the last piece that we found in our research, that we wanted to best serve the Latina women who are Spanish prefer, experiencing major life events, and lacked physical support system of belonging and care. So with that, we had very clearly defined who we were going to serve and where we could do the best work by creating this safe space of belonging. The second is really interesting. How do we shift consumers of social media into creators of social media? How do we move from lurking to creating and scrolling to sharing? And we knew that this was going to be a critical, essential component, essential building block of belonging. And here's why. The first one is that 1% internet participation rule. If you've heard it before, drop it in the chat, 1% if you've heard about this rule before. The 1% internet participation rule states that 99% of the internet users are often consumers of what's in the internet. And 1% of the internet users are actually creators in the internet space. So consumption can often give us a false sense of participation. And we knew that in order to create a true, tangible space of belonging, we needed to move our members from being consumers to creators. The second reason why we knew that this was a critical component of building a space of belonging was because in behavioral science, we know that taking action is critical. However, just being aware about taking an action or aware about an issue doesn't necessarily drive impact, or considering to take an action does not necessarily drive impact. So we knew that we wanted to create a safe space of belonging that prompted our members in order to take action that would drive behavioral change and lead into social impact. However, sometimes it can be very overwhelming. How many of you, when you started this new year, had goals and habits you wanted to create? However, it can be quite overwhelming, or oftentimes we can forget about them. So we wanted to create tools that would make taking action digestible, bite-sized, and easy to adopt. So as you can see in one of the images, you see those micro actions is part of what we created for the community, where members are encouraged to take these evidence and science-backed prompts and take actions around them that we know will generate momentum in their lives and create a sense of community. The third way we drove consumers to become creators is because we understood that sharing on social media was quite important. Because the act of sharing something is an act of shedding fear of judgment. Drop it in the chat. How many of you doubted a couple seconds or milliseconds before you press publish because you were not sure? What would people think? Will I get judged? Will this impact my work? How will I be seen? So we knew that the act of sharing within our Facebook group was going to be an act of shedding that fear of judgment and stepping into expressing vulnerability and sharing a small piece of the life experience that our members are going through. Also, we knew that by doing so, it would become an ultimate measure for safety, which is so critical for creating safe spaces of belonging. So we knew that when people saw how the community responded to the sharing within our Facebook group, they would be measuring how safe it feels to share vulnerable parts of their lives with the community. So we knew that this was a critical component and building block of belonging. The third one is creating language of belonging. How do we foster safety and mutual care? And we do that by listening with empathy, acknowledging, and social norming that is the language we encourage and we want to utilize when we are engaging in the Mujeres del Futuro Facebook group. Here is a great example of a woman who shifted her career in a male-dominated industry as a Latina, bilingual, Spanish prefer, women who had just moved cities. She was starting a new career in a technical position. She shared vulnerably what that process was like for her and what this community meant for her as she was going through this life-changing event. And the language of belonging that is social normed within the Mujeres del Futuro community is one of acknowledgement, one of encouragement. In a world filled with critic and social media filled with opinions and advice, we are the encouragers. And some of these comments you can see, it says, much success. Congratulations. You are incredible. I admire you. Bravo. Congratulations. Thanks for sharing your journey. It gives me hope that these types of positions and professional careers are available for us. Thank you for motivating us and showing the true power of Latinas. So as we're observing, the lurkers and the lookers are seeing that this is the language of belonging that is social norm within Mujeres del Futuro. It feeds into encouraging others to also become creators. And fourth, we knew that this was all great. However, can this connection really continue to deepen? And can we transcend the impact from digital space to physical space? So we knew that we had to continue to build blocks that would deepen the connection with our community members. How do we create those space of togetherness so we can practice and learn together? And what we really modeled this after is sports teams. Drop in the chat if you've been part of any sports team or even board game competitions or anything that require organized play. Drop it in the chat if you've been part of those communities. That space of togetherness where you're practicing new skills, where you're training, where you're going through obstacles together, where you're learning together, it built a special social bond. So we knew we needed to replicate that sports space of togetherness in a virtual space. And here's how we tested it and tried it out. The first one was creating a digital leadership program, a digital leadership program that showcased what these building blocks of leadership were, how they can put it into practice, how they can leverage social media to amplify and express and own their leadership power. One interesting stat about our digital leadership program is that our program has an 86% completion rate, which is incredible compared to the less than 20% completion rate in the industry average compared to other programs that are similar to ours. So as you can see, a sense of belonging, a safe space of belonging and mutual care can yield tangible results that increases productivity, increases connection, increases participation. The second program that we created were centered around entrepreneurship courses that would create financial and economic power among our Latina members. And we created these courses that ultimately helped Latina entrepreneurs in the last year generate over $1.5 million in revenue. So these sense of belonging is not only good for the soul, it's good for our economy, for our bank accounts, for our community's economic power. And third, we also created collective healing spaces because oftentimes as immigrants with multicultural, multiple identities and multi-languages, we need spaces where our experiences are reflected, discussed from an intersectional lens. So we were able to create healing spaces to accompany our members as they navigate life-changing experiences. So the question still remains, can a community that is born in social media, and in this case, as a Facebook group, transcend its impact from digital to the physical world? Here's what we can observe. The answer is yes. Our program graduates around the world started creating Mujeres del Futuro circles. These were physical spaces that were replicating the virtual building blocks of belonging that we looked at earlier today. And these safe spaces were driving connection, healing, learning, and above all, joy for the community. This was happening in all parts of Washington State, Texas, New York, Cuernavaca, Mexico, Colombia. It was happening all across. Wherever there was a program graduate of any of those programs, those women took leadership positions to create physical circles that were replicating these building blocks of belonging. And then we had the Mujeres del Futuro Summit. We said, will women show up in one space from all around the world to be here together to recreate and experience physically this virtual sense of belonging? And we were shocked, mesmerized, and delighted to see that it is possible. You will see here women that were friends that developed virtual friendships that now could give a physical embrace. And here's a video of what this experience looked like. The palpability of those virtual sense of belonging was showing up physically, and women flew from other countries, other states to be at the Mujeres del Futuro Summit. Here's a quick video to see the energy, the connection. These are women that had never seen each other in person, and yet here they were. They were like, I remember your story. I remember your vulnerable process. Your words of encouragement helped me take that very difficult decision that was transformative for my life. We were seeing in real life building blocks of belonging in a virtual space, in a digital space, in social media, transcend into physical world. And so I want to leave you with some of these thoughts. Belonging asks each of us to commit to co-creating new structures built for everyone. And this comes from the Othering and Belonging Institute. That's how this institute sees belonging. And here's how Mujeres del Futuro sees belonging. Mujeres del Futuro imagine what a safe space of mutual care and belonging can be for Latinas. And we co-created it. We made it possible. We created a system that drives equity, that acknowledges and affirms our identity, provides a safe space of practice to implement them in a world that is full of systems of inequity and transform those results that impact our bank, impact our financial power, political power, and professional and personal power. So the question that remained for us was, what's next? Could we scale this impact even further? And that is currently the project that we're working on. So I am working with digital and social first nonprofit media companies to drive the social impact and scale. So currently I am the executive director of Noticias para Inmigrantes and Revolution English, which is a nonprofit digital social first media companies that are also building these blocks of belonging and driving its almost 6 million subscribers to take action. One of the great examples of how we've achieved that is in the last election, we were able to drive over 40,000 Latinos who have never voted before to go vote because of the connection and the community they felt across these two media channels. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Social media, as we've seen in this story, is a powerful tool to drive social impact. And my question to you is, what will you create today? Thank you so much for allowing me to share the story of these wonderful Mujeres de Futuro with you today. I look forward to co-creating more of social impact with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It was great to hear from you again. Was reminded of the wisdom and energy that you brought to the class that I had a chance to take with you when I was a student in this program. So it's wonderful to see you again. And thank you so much for sharing the story of Mujeres del Futuro. We're going to hear from you again in the Q&A section in just a little while after our last learning presentation. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of questions, follow-up questions about the intention that you brought to creating that organization, and then also some of those questions about replicability that you started to touch on in the end there. So thank you so much again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Alex.
So before we move on to our last speaker of the day, Rob Salkowitz, we have one more interactive activity for you, which you'll see on Slido. And it's helping us segue into some of the questions that Rob will be helping us tackle around artificial intelligence and how it started to move into the social media space. So to start us thinking about that, the question for you here is, do you incorporate AI tools into your daily life? And if so, what purposes do you use them for? So some of you might have a quick answer to this that kind of comes to mind right away. And some of you might have to reach a little bit deeper, but there might be ways that you're using artificial intelligence that you haven't really even thought about. Perhaps your phone is auto-filling as you type. We hear some people say, rewording my thoughts in an organized and professional way, right? There's a lot of tools to help you write more efficiently. Brainstorming. I know I personally have been playing around with image generation tools like Midjourney, mostly for fun. Use them for basically everything now. It's like the Spark Notes of Google. A lot of people using Otter.ai for recording and transcribing interviews. That's something that used to not exist. When I was a journalist about 10 years ago, spent a lot of time manually transcribing interviews. That's a thing of the past. Graphic design. Planning my vacation itinerary, that's a great idea. A lot of people using ChatGPT for various different things, polishing job applications, spell checking, grammar checking. So a lot of people using AI tools for kind of like perfecting things that they've already done for editing, and then sometimes using them to generate first drafts of things that they're then going to refine on their own. Okay, fantastic. Keep those ideas coming. And I think we'll bring Akin back in here to introduce our final speaker of the day before we move to our Q&A and then join together in Gather Town for a little bit of networking and reflection. Welcome back, Akin.
Thank you so much. And again, I'm so thrilled, so excited, Alex, because, the days like this, we're able to share what we do every day and with people who we get to think very thoughtful ideas with throughout the year with a broader public. So I'm really thrilled. I'm seeing that some of our alumni are participating. Those of you who are working across organizations around the country and around the world are participating with us and learning with us. So I'm just so thrilled. And again, the past presentations, I think, are a testament to the type of learning and environment that we try to cultivate that gives us a thoughtful analysis of the types of media and digital media and social media environments that we're part of. And again, thanks to Kelly and Hannah for sharing their insights. Next up, we have another esteemed faculty member of our program. Actually, Rob has been teaching in our program for a number of years. Very popular classes, as with all of the instructors that we connected you with today. Rob is a writer, educator, and consultant specializing in the future of marketing and creative industries in digital media era. His influential and widely respected books have covered disruptive business models, entrepreneurship and innovation, generational change in society and the workplace, and the impact of knowledge industries in emerging economies, visual communication, and future work. As I list these, you're seeing the broad thinking spectrum Rob brings to us and the thought leadership that he does, again, through his classes, through his consulting, and through his books as well. Today, Rob will share with us a little bit about the question that Alex just asked you, the impact of generative AI, particularly its impact on creator economy and influencers on social media. I just want to encourage you again, this is our last learning session. And after that, Alex and I will moderate a Q&A with all three of our wonderful speakers with your questions, and continue also sharing your comments as you've been seeing them pop up on the screen as well. We can see them, so can the speakers. So please share your questions with us as Rob is speaking, and also about previous sessions as well. And you can also vote on each other's questions too. We'll have not time for all the questions that came in, so please make sure to help us select the questions that we are able to ask in the Q&A session. So with that, I want to bring Rob with us, and I want to, again, welcome him. And we are so thrilled to learn from you, Rob, today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akin and Alex. Thank you guys for sticking around. We've got very interesting, and before I begin, let me also express my profound thanks and admiration for the preceding speakers who really opened our eyes to a lot of fantastic new ideas and new thoughts about this space. It just reminds me of how proud and privileged I am to be part of this great community. And we're about to witness something today that's almost, I wouldn't say unique to CommLead, but certainly is fertile in this soil, which is spontaneous collaborative storytelling, because the four of us haven't coordinated what we're going to talk about today, and we're all approaching the very big subject of social media from our own particular vantage points within the field. And it's not exactly four blind men or four blind people describing an elephant. It is four people with very particular ideas about elephants, all looking at the same thing and bringing our own perspective to it. And hopefully, from my point of view, can try and tie some of this stuff together, because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about was also touched on by everybody that has already spoken. So as Akin mentioned, my name is Rob Salkowitz. I've been working as a strategist and consultant for going on 30 years now, focusing on the social and business impacts of new technology. So I've worked for clients ranging from global 50 companies, including Microsoft, and nonprofits like AARP that we've heard talked about before, to startups. I've written a few books. I cover media and entertainment for Forbes. I occasionally show up on TV and radio and podcasts, and I've been on the CommLead faculty since 2011. And One of the classes I teach here at ComLead is called Future of Marketing, which is where we look at the intersection of marketing and emerging technology. And if there are any current or former students on the feed, I noticed a few familiar names scrolling through YouTube earlier. You may see a few themes from the class reflected in the presentation today. Today I want to look at, by calling this third age of social branding, that suggests that there's 3 ages, and we'll sort of discuss where we came from and where we are, which was really excellently discussed by the previous speakers, toward where we're going. And of course, spoilers, that involves AI. So this is some of the work that I've focused on previously in my classwork, in my professional practice, down to stuff that I am experiencing right up to the minute, including demos that I saw yesterday afternoon that really opened my eyes to the reality of how close some of these innovations that we're going to be talking about are. One quick caveat is that because so much of my practice is focused on what's ahead, I don't dwell a lot on the here and now, and that's been very well discussed by previous speakers also. But if I go through in this presentation and I'm sort of hand-waving at stuff that feels old to me, but is really part of your current day experience with how you work with social media, don't think you're missing anything. It's not you, it's me. This is a byproduct of having my focus on the far horizon. So, that's just the orientation of my work is to prioritize what's next over maybe what is happening right now. But before I talk about the future, let me take a quick detour into the past, and I'd ask you guys to rewind your clocks 11 years, almost to the day, to the moment that I consider probably the biggest moment in the early history of social branding. Anybody remember this? So in the 2013 Super Bowl, one of the things that happened was it was being played in the Superdome in New Orleans, and the game experienced a power outage in the indoor stadium that went on for about 5 minutes. It was completely unexpected. Obviously, nobody had planned for that. And Nabisco took that opportunity to tweet this image of an Oreo cookie, one of their iconic brands, saying you can still dunk in the dark. And this became this huge moment on Twitter, and Nabisco earned tens of millions of impressions and social exposure and engagement that they would not have gotten if they had paid millions and millions of dollars for a commercial spot during the broadcast. So that really drove home to everybody that wasn't quite onto it yet the immediacy, novelty, and authenticity that social media could bring to a brand. And this tweet shaped the social media strategies of brands on social media for the next decade and beyond. If this still feels like the current moment to you, things have changed because that was sort of a galaxy a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So to give you another example of how the social media environment functioned even as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, I want to talk about a project that I did involving this guy. So the Gen Xers among you will remember that Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the 1980s was in a film called Conan the Barbarian. And it was a very popular movie. There was a sequel that was made shortly after that. And as we get into 2018 and 2019, Arnold was talking about or thinking about revisiting that character. Did he want to come back and play Conan in a sequel, which would show Conan as sort of an older guy and have new stories to tell inside the world of Conan the Barbarian? And the question that Arnold and his production company wanted to know about was, is there still an audience for this? Is there, among Arnold's fan base and the people that are into the stuff that he's doing currently, are there enough people that would justify the investment, because Conan is a licensed property and you have to go back to the copyright owner and reacquire the rights, pay the licensing fee, pay the option, and then move the project into development, would it be worth that kind of upfront investment based on where people were at right now and where the fandom base was? And this was an ideal opportunity for social media analytics. So what my role in this project was designing an opportunity to answer some of the questions around this. So first of all, Arnold Schwarzenegger is a global celebrity. He has over 26 million, or he had at that time, over 26 million followers across his platforms. And in those days, we're talking Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This was pre-TikTok. And the question is, of those 26 million people out there that were following the doings of Arnold Schwarzenegger, how many of them are interested in his genre entertainment stuff? Because remember, he got his start as a fitness bodybuilder, and there's a large number of people that follow Schwarzenegger for fitness and bodybuilding and for being that guy. He was the Republican governor of California for 8 years in the 2000s, and he attracted a lot of followers for his political activities. He's a global celebrity. He gets a lot of people following him for being a celebrity. And then within these, and then he's also followed by a lot of bots and a lot of inauthentic followers, let's say. So how do we cut through the noise of that giant following to sort of zero in on the people that would be most interested in this kind of project? So what happened is Arnold tweeted he posted this piece of content on his 3 platforms, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram, which is Conan is back. I'm prepared to get the new special edition comic book, which was just out at the time, that had him on the cover. So he's trying to determine, of all of the people following Arnold worldwide, how many people like Conan in particular. So we conducted a analytics project where we would see if we could follow within the social media data stream, what could that tell us about the attributes and affinities within Arnold's fan base, to see if we could zero in on the particular people that were interested in this project. And when we could learn that much about that audience, we could then zero in on what are the best tactics to reach and engage those people. We could figure out then, knowing who these people are, how do you grow the base? How do you find more of them in the general population of people that may be fans, that may have all of the attributes of this fandom, but that aren't people that are following Arnold? How can we target those people in a broader social media campaign? And then finally, how can we identify the metrics that are going to predict success? At this time, all of this was possible because the data streams that were coming out of the social media platforms were still in growth mode. They were still allowing people to authentically engage and interact in organic ways with the content that was out there, with the people that were out there, to express themselves. There was less of an algorithmic focus on maximizing engagement, on pushing stuff into your content stream that you would like. And it was more an experiment in how can we discover things? How can we find new information within these data streams that would be interesting and cool? So that was possible because the value of social was it was moving fast. It lets you understand your audience. It lets you engage around content, and it lets you build trust. These are the sort of the known held assets of social media compared to other stuff that's going on in the world of marketing. But today things have changed quite a bit. So first of all, organic reach is dead. If you're trying to do social for a brand, you can't count on people discovering your content on its own. You really need to pay Facebook. You need to pay Instagram or Meta. You need to pay TikTok or any of these other places to get your brand message out to the people that you want to reach. Another weird thing is that it's really, really hard to see your timeline chronologically on these major platforms. So if you were following the Super Bowl or any of the award shows, or if you're interested in the volcano that's erupting in Iceland and stuff like that right now, Twitter, which really used to be the place that you could do that, has, post-Musk really changed the way that they present that information to users, and it makes it much more difficult to be real time with this stuff. As Chris talked about in the first presentation, The APIs for data access are much more restrictive and expensive today. So the data that I used on that Schwarzenegger project a few years ago, coming out of Twitter, that created these incredibly rich and detailed pictures of who these people are and what their affinities are and things like that. And Twitter was really the gold standard for that kind of thing, for that kind of research. It's no longer possible to do that. It's certainly not as cheap. The tools are not as good, and the terms of use are weird. Because the platforms are constantly shifting their algorithms, it makes engagement and reach unpredictable. So again, the things that we would count on, and this has been changing for a while, and I think the people that are professional in the field know how to change with the times on this, but it still makes it much more challenging to engage in that way. There's brand risk, and toxic adjacencies. So essentially, nobody in the brand world wants their product to be showcased next to things that are obnoxious to their main users. And especially, again, I'm pointing a finger at you, Elon, lifting the content moderation standards and changing the way that these things happen, and also platforms optimizing for other things, makes it a lot more likely that brands are going to risk being seen in the presence of stuff that they don't want to see. Some might even say that being on Twitter at all right now under the current management is kind of a toxic adjacency for brands. And then finally, you've got platform risk, which is, again, you've always got this because you never know who's going to emerge as the leader. Is it going to be Snapchat? Is it going to be, is the next new thing coming out going to be different and better? Again, 5 years ago, we weren't talking about TikTok, and now today, TikTok is practically all we talk about. But TikTok is the subject of a lot of controversy and potential regulation. So there's business uncertainty with leaning too heavily into a social media platform these days that was not quite as present before. But the biggest problem on social, and this is a problem that's faced by all marketing right now, is that consumers don't trust advertising. So this is the good news and the bad news. The good news, the news is 24% of consumers say they trust ads that they see in newspapers. Now, anybody seeing an ad in a newspaper is probably my age or older. So there's that. But the bad news is that it just gets worse from there. That if you look at trust across all of these different media, the trust gets lower and lower the more digital the media gets. So only 18% trust brand posts by companies on social sites. So if the brand is tweeting in its own voice or is making social posts, unless they're really, really smart about it, the way that Kelly is with Microsoft, you risk having these problems of getting the attention that you want, getting the trust that you want, that you're being authentic, that you're engaging the way that you need to be. So the question is, who do we trust? Well, we trust each other. We trust the people that authentically share our interests. So much so that we have been voluntarily giving our time to people that are posting their own creator content across all of these platforms. Voluntarily giving your time is really important, because that's time that brands don't need to, aren't obnoxiously interrupting you with their pleas for attention, whether it's through banner ads or through 30-second commercial spots or pop-ups or any of the other ways that brands are trying to get our attention. We're already paying attention to influencers and content creators. And so this is presenting an opportunity for brands to kind of slide into that conversation in a more natural way, using the content creator as an ambassador of both trust and authenticity and genuine engagement with the people that they're most trying to reach. And this is true across generations, but it's especially true in the younger cohorts as well. So this is why over the last couple of years, we've seen the second age of social branding, which is really leaning into content and influence. So it's not brands talking in their own voice as much anymore. It's brands engaging with content creators engaging with brands, and figuring out ways to bring these patterns of influence into the larger conversations. So, for example, 68% of brands plan to increase their influencer marketing budgets in 2024. This is currently a $21 billion market, and that's up from $16.4 billion in 2022. So that is a 50% increase year over year, and it's poised to increase again this year. Over 200 million people consider themselves creators. So these are people that are creating content on TikTok, on YouTube, but across a lot of different platforms that may not be considered social media platforms. So this includes people producing newsletters on Etsy, people doing podcasts that they're distributing on different platforms, people creating physical goods for sale in communities like Etsy, people working in live selling environments that are becoming a very popular way to engage, that sort of rose up during the pandemic when we all couldn't go out to stores. And even platforms like OnlyFans, which is, adult entertainment oriented, has become a venue for content creation. And depending on who your brand is and who you're trying to reach, all of these different influencers present opportunities for you to start and continue these conversations. Twitch is another really popular brand that reaches a very hard to reach audience of people that are watching and interested in video games and streaming, live streaming content. On YouTube, 35,000 channels on YouTube have subscribers over 1 million. I don't think that there are 35 over the top ad supported video on demand channels right now that have 1 million subscribers, for example. So 35,000 out of 13.4 million YouTube active content creators have an enormous viewer base that are opportunities, again, to engage. And YouTubers have a 50% engagement rate. You're watching YouTube, you're going to like that video, you're going to subscribe to that video, you're going to comment in that stream. And engagement, again, if you're in the social space, engagement is the gold standard of how we measure the effectiveness of these different campaigns. So an example of content creators that are using and doing things that brand can't. I have had in my class the last couple of years a content creator named Stephen He as a guest speaker. Stephen is he's a comedian who has reached a larger audience on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram than he possibly could have if he had been on late night television every night for a month. He has an enormous global audience that was entirely self-created through his own content. And when somebody like that wades into a brand conversation with the voice and authenticity and creative sensibility that they bring, it can be very powerful. Now, this example was not paid for by anybody. It just came out of his head, but it shows ways that these kind of people can influence the conversation. I'm just going to share a little piece of this vignette that he did.
Hello. We are not going to hurt you, okay? We just brought you here to answer a few questions for us. Did you recently buy the iPhone 15?
Yes.
I knew it!
Something and Goggle? Are you guys Android?
Oh, wait, what's that? Yeah. Put the bag back up! Put the bag back up! So, buy an iPhone 15, huh? Tell me why you made that decision.
Because it's an iPhone.
I told you there's no saving them! Hold on. Why?
Well, it's got a good camera, 5x zoom. That's pretty amazing, right?
Hey, 500! We've been so intense!
Some say S23 has 100.
Well, you need 100x zoom, 105, you have right now!
But that has 48 megapixels.
We got 200 megapixels!
On the very same Galaxy S23.
Our camera's so good we can see John Cena.
Oh, and it also has an extra lens, like last year and the years before.
We got 4 lenses, 5 lenses, enough lenses to find your personality, bro! So we've already established that Android has more lenses.
Okay.
More megapixels.
Yeah.
Was it?
Yep. That's right.
So, what's your buy? iPhone? Or an Android?
iPhone.
Okay, this is gotta be an explanation, right? Doesn't make any sense.
So that's not an ad that you're going to see necessarily put on the air by Google or Samsung anytime soon. But as somebody that was in the market for a new phone over the summer, it was actually surprisingly influential to me and probably to a lot of people. And the funny thing is that Stephen is a huge Apple fan and he shoots all of his stuff on iPhone. So go figure. But again, it's an example of how content creators can bring something different to the conversation. It's emotional damage, Stephen E. That is correct. And again, like Mr. Beast, who is a content creator on YouTube, who started on YouTube and now has like 53 million followers or some gigantic number of people. His content reaches billions of people. Has become a brand unto himself. And if you go to stores right now, you're going to see like Mr. Beast brand energy drinks and snacks and all of these different things. So it becomes a two-way conversation of brands, influencers, content creators becoming brands. So that to me is the present of social media. And that's the strategy that a lot of companies and a lot of commercial players in the market are leaning into in a big way. But this is also the apple cart that AI is poised to kick over. Because in the third stage of social branding, we're seeing the rise of AI, that is artificial influencers. This young lady on the right is not a real person. She is a composite generated by a generative AI program. Animated, brought to life, is a brand avatar for a spokesman for the company that she is representing. So AI allows for content personalization. So this is the holy grail of all marketing automation that's trying to reach and influence consumers and affect the consumer experience, which is mass personalization at scale. If we could only have an individual salesperson for every customer that understood them, that would listen to them, that would respond one-on-one uniquely to their concerns and assuage their doubts and move them forward along that customer journey, well, that would be an incredible thing to have. That is the promise of AI-generated content right now. We've seen it sort of emerging through chatbots, and it's taking shape now before our eyes. It's being literally incarnated into digital avatars. So generative avatars provide authentic engagement. So this person can be not just the brand spokesman in a one-to-many giant megaphone kind of way, but can also be the one-on-one person that is answering your questions, that is addressing your issues. And that person can look however you want. They can speak your language. And when you're engaging with that person, you're getting real-time analytics. You're not waiting for the end of the week engagement report. You're not waiting for your CRM system to spit out the aggregate data for the week. You're seeing all of this stuff in real time, which means that the people behind the curtain can be turning the dials and moving the levers to maximize that engagement, to make sure that this stuff continues to get better and better. And finally, this AI influencer is smart enough to stay ahead of the algorithms, because AI, right? The AI is really good at understanding patterns and applying those learnings into the next thing that they do. So this is taking shape very, very quickly. In fact, so much so that just yesterday afternoon, I was watching a demo of an AI avatar that had been trained on an extremely complicated body of technical knowledge, in this case, legal knowledge, that was speaking through the video incarnation of a senior partner in a law firm, using that person's tone of voice, inflection, and personality to deliver personalized and very persuasive content marketing about the law firm in any of 100 different languages, with the lips perfectly synced up to the content. This wasn't custom created for millions of dollars by some giant firm. This was done by one of the partners in the law firm, who's not a tech person, in his spare time using ChatGPT to write the Python code to create this application. So this is, this is about as near future gets with this stuff coming. The problem is that AI is kind of a two-edged sword. So we've seen in the rocky first 18 months of the age of generative AI that there's some obvious drawbacks with this technology. Number one is deepfakes and potential abuse, and the fact that this kind of content can be manipulated by bad actors in really weird and terrible ways. The dissemination of mis and disinformation that amplifies the biases that our first speaker was talking about that exist inside of these bubbles. The fact that AIs have been trained on biased data And so they don't reflect the lived experiences and the special cultures that Hannah was talking about that makes social media so resonant when you feel seen by that. You're not going to be seen by AIs that haven't been trained on data because you as a data set are invisible in what they've been trained in. There's legal exposure and copyright issues that we've started to see working their way through the courts. We have this weird issue of embedded malware that because some of these models have been built by scraping the internet, they're scraping a lot of sites that have bad stuff in them, and then that malware can be exposed if you prompt the AI in the wrong way. You've got sort of a creepy, uncanny valley with, we've all seen like the extra fingers and extra limbs. This is a temporary problem. I think that the systems are going to get better at that, but there's still going to be something a little bit off about seeing AI-generated material versus reality, at least for the short term. They're aimed at the mean. So again, AIs are trained on giant data sets. They produce convincing results by averaging those data sets out together and producing something that is, that is the greatest good for the greatest number. But if you're somebody that's on the edge of the bell curve in specialized communities and things like that, it's not going to be quite as good at serving you. And then the final thing is that all AI training is retrospective by definition. You are training it on data that already exists. So there's not much recency in these systems. And if you try and train AIs on their own outputs, you're going to get to garbage and gray gook pretty quickly. So these are technical limitations of these systems that have not inhibited the adoption of them one bit. Everybody's charging full steam ahead into this area, and all of these dangers are kind of yawning chasms on either side of the narrow mountain road that we're driving down here. And any minute, you can sort of tumble off into one of these abysses. But as long as the money is continuing to flow, nobody is going to be terribly interested in that. For the content economy, the reason that this signals the dawn of a new age of content, this is something that I wrote about just last month. Algorithmic content and generative content being put on social content distribution platforms like YouTube, like Instagram, like TikTok is outperforming human-created content. And some of it is being done in a very underhanded way. It's sampling and taking existing material from these sites, and it's recutting them into videos. It's posting clickbait headlines that have been optimized because these AIs understand exactly how the algorithms work. It's generating clickbait thumbnails. It's pushing all of the buttons designed to get the platforms to put this content in front of you instead of human-generated content. Well, the problem here is that if AI-generated content outperforms human-generated content at scale, and from YouTube's point of view, from their financial incentive, or Instagram or any of these places, they're looking for engagement. And they don't care if the engagement is generated by humans or by bots, as long as you are looking, as long as you are clicking. Because they're selling the ads, they're pushing their numbers through that top line. So if they do not have an incentive to prefer human creators, then very soon with the AI systems that are faster and more responsive to the algorithmic updraft, they're going to push out, and we've seen existing content creators complaining about this already, that they're seeing the impact of this on monetization, they're seeing the impact of this on engagement, on their own abilities to grow the audience, their own abilities to authentically engage. So if human creators are demonetized and abandon these platforms, in 6 months, who is going to go to YouTube to look at bot recycled content that is done by definition retrospectively by remixing and reimagining all kinds of new stuff? Even in the hands of gifted content creators, the recycling of this content is going to see limited returns. And so end users are going to get burned out if the platforms don't immediately step in on untrustworthy, inauthentic, and derivative AI content and filter people toward the better applications of this technology to express their own creativity. Right now, they don't have the incentives to do that. And so I think we're going to see this get worse before it gets better. So let me leave you with some trends to watch in this third age of social branding. So as I said, we're going to see an onslaught of lifelike avatars, and we're going to see a lot of the human-centric engagement in real time on social media be replaced by very, very convincing AI-generated content. As a countermeasure toward some of the abuses that are happening in the AI space, we're going to see watermarking and other authentication methods scrambling to keep up. So yesterday also I had a conversation with somebody on the content authentication side who's very interested in this. We're going to see live streaming and live selling for transactional engagement. That's really gaining momentum. We're seeing immersive technology, so what's coming out next in XR and AR and VR. And as this stuff gets better, those are going to replace some of our linear social networks. There's a reason that Meta continues to pour billions and billions of dollars into the metaverse. Whether or not this is a near-term thing, they definitely see it as a long-term bet. And then finally, post-pandemic, we're seeing a return to experiential and live events that are serving the role of social media because it's easier now than ever to put all of the pieces together and get data out of your real-time social events in the same way that you would do in an online world. That's what I'll leave you with. One last thing is that when it comes to AI, you'll hear a lot of people in the industry talking about the inevitability of certain developments in the AI world. And I would caution you against that kind of thinking, because right now we're at one of these rare moments of inflection where we, the people, kind of have a voice in the direction that this is going to go. And that we should be upvoting through our own engagement, through our own use, through our own preferences, the applications of AI that we think are useful and helpful and interesting, and downvoting the stuff that threatens to hollow out the authenticity of experiences, either digitally or in real time and face-to-face. Thank you very much. And thanks again to all of you for sticking with this. Looking forward to a good Q&A with the other speakers following immediately.
Thank you so much, Rob. This was so insightful, and we learned a lot, and we learned through all the learning sessions, but again, so many insights there about the evolution, really. And today we were looking at a number of different cases, different moments, but you left us with that final stage where we find ourselves in so many questions to answer still, as you also deliberated at the very end. So we maybe want to move on to that now. Just so you all know, we are going to have a Q&A now with all of the speakers from session 2. And we're going to ask them some questions for them to answer all together, and some questions that will ask them to answer individually. And these are questions, of course, you asked. And if you still have time to vote on the questions that you definitely want to hear, so that we can prioritize that question, as again, our time is limited in comparison to the huge topic we're trying to cover. I'm sure we could talk about this for days. So with that, I want to invite our other speakers too, Hannah and Kelly. And again, thank you all so much for all your insights. Again, I get so thrilled to get to hear from all of you, to learn from you, and this was a special treat for me. I know that it's a treat for all of those who are tuning in live or will watch the recording. I'm sure many people will revisit also your talks. There's so much. I again tried to take notes during Rob's presentation, but I have they're all around, and I'm going to definitely revisit the recording myself to gather those insights and to contain my thoughts. So with that, we're going to transition now to Q&A, and I know that we want to start with one that is for all of you, and I'll turn it over to Alex now to share that question with you.
Yeah, so many of the people we have in the audience here are professional marketers, communicators, and sort of in service to them, and the question, the central question that they might be wondering, can you give us, I know it's hard to distill, but if you could give us one piece of advice that you'd give to them for, you know, people who are managing social media for organizations or small businesses, what would that piece of advice be? And maybe we can start with you, Kelly, and then go to Hannah, and then Rob didn't have a chance to prepare for this at all, so we'll go to him last.
No worries. Thank you. I have spent my career in Fortune 50 companies, which is kind of funny. So when I think about what is a single piece of advice I would advise is to really understand what it is you hope social media will do. I think that oftentimes, especially in large corporations, it really depends on where people see the maturity of social media and the impact it can hold for a brand. I think for smaller companies, for personal brands, for people who are creators, it's a much more distinct channel in driving action versus when you have larger brands. It's really a brand awareness play, right? It's a space to be in that we should be in, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to, drive purchase intent or clicks to web, things like that. So really understand what it is that your organization hopes social will provide and help educate on where you can see some of the impact or difference you can make.
Thank you. So figure out why you're there, what you're trying to achieve first, and then think about the how. Thank you.
Yeah.
How about for you, Hannah?
I think for me, the phrase would be jack of all trades, master of none. So striving to be everywhere and be everything to everyone. Ultimately, you end up being nothing to anyone. So this specifically in the question goes to small businesses or brands. I think being hyper-focused, who you can best serve, and creating a community has a lot more potential of a virality and distribution. So I would say just remember, jack of all trades, master of none.
So that could boil down to like finding your specific platform where your community already is, maybe, and building more community there. Thank you. Seems like great advice. How about for you, Rob?
So first, 2 emphatic likes for both of those responses. I will endorse them wholeheartedly. With my orientation toward AI right now, the seductive power of these tools is incredible, and the things that you can do with them is really awesome. I would say think of them as a tool and a partner and not as a crutch, because in the very near future, if the AI is not working for you, you're going to be working for the AI. And I can tell you which one is going to be better.
Thank you.
Thank you all again for this insightful first answers. And I want to dive a bit deeper because I know that there are a lot of specific questions about the presentations too. And we'll try to manage maybe one to each, and then we have an overall question. But if time allows for it, maybe we'll be able to ask another to all of you. So I want to start with Kelly in the order of the presentations. Kelly, one question that actually got voted for us a lot for us to ask you is what strategies do brands employ to maintain their authentic tone on social channels, particularly when the tone of a specific platform is different from the established tone of the brand? I think you started talking a little bit about that with Microsoft and TikTok in the presentation. But so how do you match or kind of tone relate to the platform?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And thank you for that. So any large brand will have a brand studio, right? They will give you the brand tone of voice, and here's the colors, the feel, everything that we think about for the brand. My team will take that, and then we will do a social tone of voice workshop. And we do them per platform. The way that we speak or, chat or even communicate with other people on X is going to be very different than how we do it on TikTok. We try not to stray too far, right? We don't want to end up being, I think there's that meme with Steve Buscemi where he's like, hey, cool kids. We try to keep it still in the space of, we are a professional brand. We are a large company. We have an intended following and a perception within the world. We're also a very trusted brand. So we definitely try to make sure that it's not so wildly far. It still fits and feels like it's Microsoft, that it feels like it's Windows or Edge or one of the other brands that we have. But we do actually have a very special conversation where we go through a social tone of voice to make sure that it matches with the presentation of how we appear in social, but also doesn't stray so far from the brand itself that we don't actually connect back to the work and the trust that is built for the brand.
That makes a lot of sense. There was a question for Rob that I think kind of follows up on this nicely, which was, how do you balance being authentic and personal while maintaining your brand voice and tone, especially when you're more of a professional product instead of a consumer good?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to kind of just the old best practices around thought leadership, and that a lot of times lean into what makes your consumers excited about your product. Be authentically enthusiastic about the company that you're working with, and have the people that are involved in that, and try to solicit as wide as possible spectrum of folks within your company that bring their own points of view to it, because it's a Rorschach test, and everybody's going to see themselves in your brand and in your spokesperson. So you want to give as many people as possible a way in that they feel belongs to them.
So the who, in terms of who is managing your brand, could actually, lead to some kind of myopia or missed opportunities in terms of the reach that you have.
Yeah, you should definitely keep your focus as wide as you can, and try to understand as many perspectives as you can in articulating your brand.
Maybe a follow-up question that also builds on this. So thank you all to our presenters, but also those of you who are participating and asking such thoughtful questions that build on one another. To Hannah, but kind of thinking about this authenticity and brands, and you talked a lot about cultivating belonging on social media. One of our questions is about that. Are there brands and organizations who are doing a good job of cultivating belonging on social media that you're following, that you could share with us, that you would say, the principles that you share that take those into heart?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of different organizations that are doing a great job. Just couple to mention, Nomadness Tribe is transforming the travel space for Black travelers. There's Ex Hood, creating community and spaces of belonging for LGBTQ parents. Black Girl Healing House, reimagining what the healing space looks like for Black women. But the one that particularly I wanted to bring for discussion was Keith Lee. He is a very renowned, famous TikToker with millions and millions of followers. He goes to mom and pop restaurants, tries the food, rates the food. But what happens is the Keith Lee effect afterward, which is the ability to mobilize consumers and restaurant goers to go and support these small and mom and pop shops. So it's interesting because as a symbol, as a figure, as a brand influencer, is able to create a community and a sense of belonging by being honest and clear about his beliefs, what he stands for. And by being so clear, it's becoming a symbol for a community. And because people are mobilizing in physical realm and supporting these mom and pop shops and businesses, it's translating into real world impact as well. So I think Keith Lee is a very interesting influencer figure brand to study and continue to explore what his effect is and its impact on belonging.
It's interesting. It seems like a lot of those that you cited, and then Rob was talking about, or somebody was talking about Mr. Beast earlier. It seems like we talk about a lot of people who are starting with the personality, authenticity, connection to the audience, and then it's almost like the product is coming after that. And I wonder if that is going to be something we're going to see more of in the future. Like it's more about who and the building trust first, and then the sales come later. I want to go back to Kelly because there was a question from one of our students. Kelly, you mentioned that brands are starting to look at Generation Alpha already. This is a generation that has just been identified. I just found out recently that my children are Generation Alpha. They are also certainly media consumers, engaged with the Microsoft products, engaged with Mr. Beast. My son's always saying emotional damage. So now I know where that comes from. So thank you for that. I've learned something today. So the student asked, I'm curious at what point in a generation's lifespan do brands start considering them? Is it based on age, cultural influence, or something else? What happens if brands start engaging earlier? Is there ever too early?
Yeah, no, really good questions. So all of us work in advertising. There are protections in place for advertising towards children, and we don't. There's not, right? So we don't at all engage or target or identify anybody under the age of 18 when it comes to advertising within the company. Like that's just a policy that most major brands have and hold, and we do the same. When I said we're thinking about it, it's more of a, okay, what would be the next thing that we should be looking at? And really it's from platforms and from trends. It's not from the audience perspective. We're not identifying or looking at anybody in that space. It's more of a, what's the next one coming up, right? Blue Sky, is that one that's going to be big? Is there something with YouTube changing? Will we look at that? So it's more of a creative concept and conversation as opposed to an audience identification component.
And if I could jump in on this, that kind of, important in this conversation is understanding what a generation is, and that, when we first started being aware of this from a marketing standpoint, we were talking about the baby boomers, which is a demographic phenomenon from 1946 to 1963. There was this gigantic surge in the population that, as they moved through different stages of life, from being teenagers to being young adults and yuppies and people in the workplace to being seniors and management, just because of their numbers, they're too big to ignore. Gen X, by contrast, was like a lot smaller, and and that was also a demographic phenomenon brought on by the birth control pill, established in 1963. Birth rate went off a cliff, and it took 18 years to recover until about 1980-81, which is where we demarcate millennials. And so those things, and I say this as somebody that actually wrote a book on this subject, that in certain ways these distinctions are meaningful, but as we move farther and farther away from demographic moorings and specific things, it becomes more of a continuum. And the fact that what's fundamentally the difference between a 10-year-old looking at the world and a 15-year-old, or that same person when they're 15 or 25, is a much harder question to answer broadly than it is specifically.
Thank you so much, Rob. Yeah, that's, I think, really important. And maybe I'll tie that to a question to Hannah that actually is about platforms. So it's about the generations, of course, and the evolution of generations and the size, but then also it's about kind of all of you have gestured to kind of thinking about which platform to choose to engage. And I know that, Hannah, the example you shared, Mujeres del Futuro, is and was it was started and is on Facebook. Why that choice? And considering some of our conversations around generations and kind of trends around different social media, I'm going to add this component. Would you consider a different platform today? Or what other platforms would you evolve towards? So that I would love to hear your thoughts.
That's a wonderful question. Thank you, Akin. I think I echo what Kelly mentioned, that we're moving away from so much demographic. But when Mujeres del Futuro was founded in 2019, when we looked at all the landscape of platform and social, we had a hypothesis of how we wanted to build a virtual space of belonging. So we knew that we wanted capabilities for virtual containment, a space that would facilitate co-creation of conversation. And at that point in time, Facebook group was growing on the rise. It had all of the bells and whistles needed to create that community feeling. And the other component that we looked at is, given the audience that we were focused on serving, like 73% of Latinos use Facebook. So it's one of the most widely adopted social media by the audience that we wanted to serve. So that is why we chose Facebook group. Now, fast forward years later, which feels decades in the social media world, we're seeing the shift of that co-creation of safe space to more of one-directional, entertainment-based that shines into the belief and the symbolism, like Keith Lee I had mentioned, and the way communities and spaces of belonging and people feeling seen and understood is shifting and evolving. So I think we have been in deep conversations of what does an evolution of Mujeres del Futuro look like on TikTok, or do we go directly into YouTube Shorts, which is a different audience, and a different generation. So those are some of the conversations that are happening and exploring still, because it's such a different dynamic and building blocks of belonging.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I mean, every platform has different attributes and they kind of work for different people. And then there's the question of like, where are your people already, like we were talking about before. So we have, I think, time for one more question from the audience, and then a question for all of you. And kind of going from looking backwards to looking forward, there was a question for Rob about which platform do you think will go viral in the future? Where should content creators or companies be focused now? I don't know if you were watching the Super Bowl. There was a Snapchat commercial. I guess having a commercial on the Super Bowl might tell you that that's not where you should focus. But yeah, Rob, what do you think? What is the platform of the future?
So I think it's a lot more fragmented now than it used to be. That I think that the days of a platform getting to gigantic scale was a phenomenon of the last decade. and that we're going to see a lot more micro communities. This is why I'm very big into owned content right now. So like something like Substack itself is an imperfect thing, but the idea of Substack, which is a community of people that's aggregating people that are interested in one particular thing, and being able to publish your own stuff to that group, that model is very compelling, and it's also less susceptible to the kind of algorithmic gaming that you would get from you would see in these social things. That's much less useful for brands because you don't have that scale, you don't have that reach, and the metrics that you would get out of a platform like that are not going to tell you nearly as much as you would need to know. But I think that everything has a backlash, and I think the era that we've been in of social media of the last 10 or 15 years is just breaking at the seams. It feels unsustainable to me, and that the next something is going to look very, very different from what we've seen.
Mm-hmm. Maybe there is no next big thing.
Yeah, or a lot of next little things.
Maybe we'll wrap up with a question that builds on that for all of you to get your sentiments. We talked a lot about different topics as it relates to social media. Of course, our participants and in general, communication and marketing professionals have limited resources, sometimes limited time. So if they had to privilege one emerging trend or tool as it relates to social media and learn and invest in kind of finding out more about it for their organizations, for their own personal use and growth, what would that trend or tool be that you'd like to highlight for our participants today? Maybe we can start with Kelly.
Sure. One of my favorite things about social media that comes back, and this was definitely impacted by some of the data connections on X, is the idea of social listening. There's a lot being shared, a lot being talked about, a lot being said about your product, about your brands, about your space. And having a really robust social listening approach can actually help you think how you will directionally approach content, creators, etc. And so I think social listening is one of the unsung heroes of social media, especially when it comes to corporations, agencies, brands developing future ideas, understanding how features are landing, understanding the impact of something. But social listening is my favorite trend, topic, you name it, thing to kind of put in place for social.
Thank you. What about for you, Hannah?
I think, coming from putting my lens as a woman of color, working and being part of communities of color, I'm thinking generative AI because it's a tool to help us imagine what's possible. And I think a lot of our voices could be significant contributor to how we imagine the future and imagine what's possible and imagine that narrative. So, I would encourage generative AI and making sure that we're not echoing and perpetuating the existing systems of inequity, but rather reimagining what's possible through those tools.
Thank you so much, Hannah. What about you, Rob?
And to amplify that, within the space of AI, the tools that enable the ethical application of AI as distinguished from other things. First of all, that we've got a consumer audience that has demonstrated interest in social responsibility on the part of brands. So there's 3 pillars to this that are really important: to make sure that the data that is going into these systems is obtained ethically and with consent and with permission, that the methods of training the data are done properly, and that the labor standards are adhered to, because it's become a very exploitive industry. And the third thing is that there is transparency for the output so that we know what's real and what's fake. We can't count on the platforms or the actors in the space to do this for themselves. So I would urge marketers to keep an eye on tools that let you authenticate the stuff that is hygienic AI for your enterprise use and for your audience, and industry-wide initiatives that are going to give the good housekeeping seal of approval to different tools and techniques, and segregate out the stuff that's garbage, the stuff that's going to do deceptive, deep fake, sourced from data models that are no good. And that if we can work with our consumers and our audience to educate each other about what's an acceptable use of this, we're going to end up at a lot better place than letting Google and Facebook and Microsoft tell us what AI is supposed to be.
Thank you so much. Again, so much rich content coming from all our speakers. I want to thank you all. You leave us with deep thoughts about thinking about how to, consider social listening, how to consider generative AI for all, and also maybe that last component around ethics, really, and understanding the makeup of these tools that we're interacting with every day, investing some time in consideration of not only potential but shortcomings, so that we stay ahead in our interactions with them as well. Again, Hannah, Rob, Kelly, thank you so much for being a part of our learning event today. I was thrilled to learn from you. I have a lot to digest, and we want to really share our deep appreciation of your insights and thoughtful approach to the topic today. Thank you all.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for sticking with it.
So with that, we come almost to the end. We're not done yet. So thank you for learning with us today. We hope that this learning led to some new questions and thoughtful engagement with social media as you engage with it at your work, in your lives, and in the near future. Now we move on to the truly interactive part of the event for you all who've been listening for all of the sessions or part of the sessions, and if you want to connect with others who've done the same with you. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex to tell you a little bit about what comes next in our program, and then I'll say a final few words after that.
Yeah, so next up, we're going to be convening in gather.town, and I think we're going to put the link to find us there. So we're going to be off of the YouTube stream and over in GatherTown. It's the virtual space where we'll be meeting. I will be there as a cute little avatar, just like that one. I think mine's going to be wearing purple suspenders, and it's going to have really big hair. You can see the lead avatar running around there. So there will be tables where you can meet with people, other attendees of the event, and just sit down and then talk basically on video chat with a select group of people who want to talk about the same thing that you do. So it's a great way to meet people and network a little bit if you want to connect with other people who have joined at the event and then discuss some of the topics that we've been discussing. So think of it like a Zoom breakout room, except you get to decide who you're talking to and what you're talking about. And you get to roam around a little bit in a virtual space that I don't know if I'm dating myself, but it reminds me of like Legend of Zelda on the original NES. I feel like I'm going to find like a piece of the Triforce or something like that. So you can go to bit.ly/gathercoms, GATHERCOMMS, or scan the QR code right there. If you want to join on your phone, I think you can join on your phone or your desktop. And you can keep watching the stream while you head over there in another browser window if you want to. And while folks are joining that, Ken, do you have any last words you want to share?
Yes, I just want to thank you all for engaging with us today. The topic was social media, and we encourage you all to share your insights, what you learned today. Maybe you can revisit the recording too in your social media channels if you're not trying to give it up. And with your organizations too, again, we try to make sure that the learnings are as approachable and as accessible as possible. That's why we make this event live streamed and free for all. And again, this event was produced by Communication Leadership Community. We're a master's program at the University of Washington. Some of you are already familiar with us, but you're more than welcome to find out more about our program through our website. Again, we do events like this once a year, but we have other publicly engaged events too. So if you want to continue learning, we try to provide ample channels for what we're thinking about. So please continue to follow us. Last but not least, I want to conclude this event with a big shout out to the students and faculty member, Richard McLean, who's teaching the class, and all the students behind the scenes. And I think you're seeing them. Hello, well, congratulations all. We had a huge team, and you can tell from the quality of this production too, huge team that produced this event and made sure that it was relatable and engaging. It's that intentionality, that community building, that's the very subject matter of the class that Richard is teaching, and I'm so glad. And again, I want to thank them all for this outstanding engagement. And I think it was, for me, the best live stream we've ever done because it engaged more of your community. So a big, big shout out to them. So now let's continue the interaction on Gather if you choose to. And for those of you watching the recording, thank you for joining us. Again, don't forget we'll get in touch about filling in reflection questions and getting a recognition of your learning as well. Thank you all so much. See you at Gather.